Hey there, tonight we're diving into the curious and wild world of Viking Berserkers rituals. What you're about to discover might just have you questioning if these warriors were fueled by spirits, or perhaps something a little more mushroomy. If these stories help you unwind, I'd love a quick like or subscribe, but only if they're genuinely working for you. I'm curious where in the world you're listening from, so drop your location and local time in the comments. It's amazing seeing our little community span the globe through these historical tales. Now get comfortable, perhaps dim the lights, or find that perfect pillow position, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You're standing in the dim light of a Nordic longhouse, the air thick with the smell of animal hide and a hint of something more herbal. In the corner, a group of warriors, the legendary Viking Berserkers, prepares for battle. But before they can unleash their famed fury, there's a little pre-game ritual. Spoiler alert, it doesn't involve protein shakes or meditation apps. These guys are about to chug down a concoction that would make your morning coffee seem like child's play. Welcome to the world of Viking Berserkers and their not-so-secret weapon, the intoxicating brew that fueled their infamous Berserker rage. Picture a blend of botanicals so powerful it could make a modern-day chemist raise an eyebrow. The Berserkers weren't just any warriors. They were the rock stars of the Viking Age. Mention them in a saga, and you've got an instant blockbuster. But like any rock star worth their salt, they had their quirks, and their choice of pre-battle beverage was no exception. Forget Red Bull. These guys had their own energy drink, a heady mix of nature's most potent plants. Now, let's get into the chemistry of it all. The main suspect, the Amanita muscaria mushroom. You know, the red one with white spots that looks like it belongs in a fairy tale. These fungi aren't just for whimsical garden gnomes. They pack a punch that's been linked to the Berserker's legendary frenzy. The mushroom contains ibotenic acid and musamal, potent psychoactive compounds that could turn a mild-mannered Viking into a raging warrior. Or, let's be honest, a guy seeing dragons in the middle of the battlefield. But before you start thinking these Berserkers were just tripping their way to victory, there's more to the story. It wasn't just about the mushrooms. The Norse mythology wrapped around these rituals added a layer of divine endorsement. The Berserkers weren't just high. They were believed to be possessed by the spirit of Odin, the chief god, known for his wisdom, war, and a penchant for shape-shifting. In this context, their frenzy wasn't mere madness. It was a divine transformation. And let's not forget some of the other ingredients rumored to be in the mix. Henbane, for instance, a plant with a track record for inducing hallucinations and delirium. It was the Viking version of a cocktail with too much punch. Modern science suggests that the alkaloids in henbane, like hyoscyamine and scopolamine, would have contributed to the Berserkers' altered state, making them fearsome and, frankly, a bit unpredictable. But why did these guys need such an extreme pre-battle ritual? Reality check. Being a Viking wasn't all horned helmets and epic voyages. The life of a Berserker was brutal, and the stakes were high. Going into battle with a clear head might have been the sensible choice, but charging in with a sky-high confidence level and a touch of divine madness. Now that was a game-changer. In the grand scheme of Norse society, Berserkers occupied a unique, almost mythical position. They weren't your average foot soldiers. They were elite warriors imbued with a mix of fear and awe. This cocktail of psychoactive substances wasn't just a means to an end. It was part of their identity, a ritual that set them apart from mere mortals, and in some cases, even from other Vikings. Yet with all this mystique, there's a darker reality to confront. Picture a bunch of warriors high on hallucinogens, swinging swords with abandon. The romantic image of the Berserker as a noble warrior is a bit frayed at the edges when you consider the chaos and potential collateral damage of their frenzy. Remember, this was a time when medical care was rudimentary at best. A Berserker in full rage didn't just pose a threat to enemies, but also to his own comrades if he couldn't distinguish friend from foe. And here's the kicker. Modern researchers think some of the Berserkers' reputation might have been more myth than reality. The sagas, after all, were written down centuries after the events they describe, with a flair for the dramatic that would make Hollywood blush. The image of an unstoppable, mushroom-fueled warrior was as much a product of storytelling as it was of history. So, next time you're tempted to romanticize the past, remember the Viking Berserkers and their potent brews. They remind us that history is often a mix of fact and fiction, reality and myth. And sometimes the truth is stranger and more intoxicating than anything we could imagine. Now, let's shift gears from the mythical frenzy of the Berserkers to the somewhat less glamorous but equally fascinating world of Viking economics. Because, as any good chieftain would tell you, even the most ferocious warriors have their price. And trust me, keeping these rage-fueled warriors at the ready wasn't as simple as throwing them a few scraps and a pat on the back. First off, let's talk about the Berserkers' diet. Spoiler, it wasn't all mead and mushrooms. These guys needed serious fuel to maintain their legendary stamina. You know that saying, an army marches on its stomach? Well, a Berserker rampages on his. A Berserker's diet was a carnivorous symphony, heavy on the protein. We're talking meat, and lots of it. Beef, mutton, pork, whatever was available, and crucially, whatever was affordable. But here's the kicker. Meat wasn't cheap. In fact, archaeological evidence suggests that in some areas of Scandinavia, only about 25% of a typical household's diet consisted of meat. So, keeping a berserker well-fed could seriously dent the communal granary. Now, throw in the fact that these guys didn't just sit around waiting for the next battle. They trained, and hard. Think of it as a proto-gym membership, but with axes and a lot more danger. Training maintained their fearsome physique, and that meant more food, more resources. And let's face it, a hangry berserker is the last thing you want crashing your longhouse party. Economic demands didn't stop at the dinner table. Outfitting a berserker was its own line item in the Viking budget. Sure, they might not have needed the elaborate armor of other warriors. After all, they were known for going into battle shirtless, or in shirts made from bear skin, hence the name berserker, from bear shirt. But they still needed weapons. A good sword or axe was a serious investment. The average sword took weeks to forge and could cost the equivalent of several cows. And let's be honest, if you're a Viking chieftain, do you really want your fiercest warriors running into battle with subpar equipment? Talk about an HR nightmare. Then there's the little matter of the Berserkers' supernatural reputation. This fear factor was part of their allure and part of their tactical advantage, but it also added to their financial burden. See, chieftain couldn't just keep a bunch of pumped-up, possibly hallucinogenic warriors on hand without a plan. These guys were both a blessing and a curse, a double-edged sword, if you will. They were an asset when leading raids, where their reputation alone could cause enemy lines to break. But in times of peace, they were like a loaded cannon with no target. Keeping them happy, and crucially, occupied was a constant balancing act for any leader worth their salt. Speaking of raids, let's talk plunder. Here's where the Berserkers really earned their keep. In a successful raid, they were the spearhead, the shark troops that broke the enemy's resolve. And when the spoils were divided, they got their share, a pie sliced many ways. This wasn't just a matter of fairness, it was an economic necessity. A chieftain who failed to reward his berserkers might find them less enthusiastic next time around, or worse, looking for opportunities elsewhere. Remember, loyalty in the Viking world was often as fluid as the North Sea waves. But this brings us to the crux of the economic challenge. While berserkers could generate immense wealth through successful raids, they were also a financial liability during the lean times. Not every raid was a success, and not every summer brought a bounty of spoils. During those harsh Scandinavian winters, the cost of maintaining such high-maintenance warriors could strain even the most prosperous settlement. It was a classic high-risk, high-reward scenario that would make any Wall Street trader break into a cold sweat. To add another layer to this economic puzzle, remember that Viking society was intensely competitive. Chieftains were constantly on the lookout for ways to boost their influence and prestige. Having a cadre of berserkers was a status symbol, but also a potential ticking time bomb. Should a rival chieftain offer better terms, more food, richer plunder, you could find your prized berserkers jumping ship. This wasn't just about economics. It was about power and survival in a world where loyalty was often measured in meat and mead. The berserkers were the product of a society that thrived on a delicate balance of fear, respect, and mutual benefit. They were both a tool and a testament to the intricate social fabric of the Viking world. And like any tool, they could be wielded for great success or catastrophic failure. So, as we peel back the layers of the berserkers' history, it becomes clear that their story is one of myth meeting reality in the most dramatic fashion. They were the embodiment of Viking ferocity, yet their existence was grounded in the cold, hard arithmetic of survival. As we move forward, we'll dive deeper into how these economic dynamics played out on the grander stage of Viking expansion and conflict. But for now, keep this in mind. Behind every legendary warrior is a ledger, and the Berserkers were no exception. As we pivot from the economic ledger to the psychological dynamics swirling around the Berserkers, let's dive into the deep end of Viking social currents. Picture this. In a time when reputation was as volatile as the North Atlantic weather, the Berserkers were the ultimate double-edged sword. Their fearsome aura was a social currency as much as it was a weapon, a reality that any Viking chieftain worth his salt had to navigate with the finesse of a seasoned politician. At the heart of it all, the Berserkers were both revered and feared, often in the same breath. Within their communities, these warriors occupied a mythic space. They were the embodiment of raw, untamed power, the kind of force that could turn the tide of battle. But they were also a living, breathing reminder of the chaos that lay just beneath the veneer of Viking order. It's like keeping a pet tiger, awe-inspiring, sure, but you never quite forget those teeth. Their ferocity on the battlefield was matched by their unpredictability at home. In the close-knit communities of Viking Scandinavia, where everyone knew everyone's business, having a berserker in the neighborhood added a certain edge to social gatherings. Think of the tension at a local feast when the mead flowed a bit too freely, and the berserker started eyeing someone's prized livestock or daughter. It was a tightrope walk of respect and terror. Now, here's where things get juicy. The berserker's fearsome reputation was leveraged in the Norse political arena. Viking chieftains, the savvy ones anyway, understood the power of a good PR campaign. And nothing says, "Don't mess with me," quite like a berserker or two in your entourage. In the power games of the Viking world, projecting strength was everything. It was like the early medieval version of a Twitter beef, but with axes and actual stakes. The berserker's reputation was a tool for both intimidation and negotiation. Let's say you're a chieftain looking to expand your influence. You show up at a neighboring village with a few berserkers in tow, and suddenly your demands carry a bit more weight. It's like rolling up to a board meeting with a pack of wolves. People tend to pay attention, but this was a double-edged sword. Pun entirely intended. The same traits that made berserkers useful in warfare and politics made them a liability in peacetime. Their legendary rage didn't come with an off switch, and when there were no enemies to fight, that energy didn't just evaporate. It had to go somewhere, and often that meant trouble at home. Domestic disputes with a berserker involved could escalate faster than you can say Valhalla. This volatility was both a blessing and a curse for the chieftains. A berserker's loyalty was a valuable commodity, but it was also fickle. A slight, a perceived insult, or simply a better offer from a rival could turn these warriors from allies to adversaries. It was like trying to hold onto a handful of sand during a storm. Inevitably, some would slip through your fingers. Now, let's talk about the social dynamics that kept these warriors in line, or at least tried to. Viking society was a tapestry woven from threads of kinship, loyalty, and mutual obligation. The berserkers might have been the wild cards, but they were still part of this intricate social web. Their families, their honor, and their oaths bound them to the community in ways that transcended their individual ferocity. In many ways, the berserkers were a reflection of the collective Viking psyche, a mix of courage, violence, and a deep-seated belief in the supernatural. Their ability to tap into what was seen as a divine fury made them both revered and feared. It was a reputation that served them well, both at home and abroad. Yet, it was also a reputation that could become a burden, a constant pressure to live up to the legend. The idea of the berserker as a conduit for divine power was more than just myth. It was a social contract. In a world where the gods were as real as the earth beneath their feet, the berserkers were seen as chosen, touched by Odin himself. This belief added a layer of complexity to their social standing. On one hand, it elevated them above the ordinary. On the other, it isolated them within that same society. Chieftains exploited this duality to their advantage. By associating themselves with berserkers, they weren't just aligning with elite warriors. They were tapping into a deeper narrative of divine favor. It was a clever bit of Viking-era spin, a way to legitimize authority and intimidate rivals without lifting a finger. After all, why fight when you can let your reputation do the heavy lifting? Yet, this divine narrative was not without its pitfalls. In a society that prized honor and reputation, any deviation from the expected could be disastrous. A berserker who failed to deliver in battle, or who turned his rage inward on his community, risked not just his own standing, but that of his chieftain. It was a precarious balance between maintaining the myth and managing the reality. And let's not forget about the sagas, the epic tales that chronicled the exploits of Viking heroes, berserkers included. These stories, passed down through generations, were as much a part of the berserkers' legacy as the battles they fought. They were the ancient Norse equivalent of viral content, shaping perceptions and solidifying the berserkers' place in history. But like all good stories, the line between fact and fiction was a blurred one, leaving modern historians to sift through the exaggerations for kernels of truth. So, as we unravel the complex tapestry of berserker life, one thing becomes clear. These warriors were not just mindless brutes. They were deeply woven into the social and political fabric of their time, a testament to the Viking Age's blend of mythic narrative and harsh reality. And as we continue to explore their legacy, remember this: every legend is born from the intersection of truth and imagination, and the berserkers were no exception. Stay tuned as we delve deeper into this fascinating world where myth and reality collide in ever more surprising ways. And as the sagas swirl in our minds like a Nordic storm, let's grab our historical magnifying glass and sift through the pages of time to separate the berserkers' myth from their gritty reality. Because, let's face it, when it comes to these legendary Viking warriors, the truth is often stranger and decidedly more brutal than the tales. First up, let's tackle the elephant, or should I say bear, in the room, those famous berserkers' supernatural abilities. If you believe the stories, these guys were essentially the medieval equivalent of the Hulk, with a dash of Thor for good measure. They were said to charge into battle with the strength of 10 men, impervious to pain and fear. But were they really these invincible juggernauts, or is this all just saga-fueled fantasy? Cue the historical evidence. Archaeological finds and primary sources suggest that, while the berserkers were undoubtedly fierce, they were also very much human. Their so-called invincibility, likely a combination of clever psychological warfare and the intoxicating effects of their pre-battle rituals. Remember that mushroom cocktail we talked about? Well, it turns out that a healthy dose of Amanita muscaria combined with adrenaline might make you feel invincible, but it doesn't actually make you bulletproof, or, in this case, sword-proof. The notion of berserkers being immune to pain is similarly suspect. Sure, they probably had a high tolerance, aided by their altered state, but the idea that they didn't feel any pain at all is more myth than reality. Think of it this way. Anyone who stubbed their toe knows that pain is part of the human experience, and no amount of Viking bravado can change that. Then there's the myth of the berserkers' wild, animalistic transformation. Sagas describe them donning bear or wolf skins, howling like beasts, and even taking on the characteristics of these animals during battle. It sounds thrilling, but let's peel back the layers. The term berserker itself comes from bersark, meaning bear shirt, which is more about intimidating fashion choices than actual shape-shifting. It's a bit like wearing your favorite sports team's jersey to a game. It's about identity, not magical transformation. In reality, these animal motifs were likely symbolic, tapping into the Norse belief system that revered the strength and ferocity of animals. By donning animal skins, berserkers were making a psychological statement, embodying the spirit of the creature to gain a mental edge over their foes. It's intimidation 101, and it worked like a charm, or a really good Netflix villain. Speaking of psychological warfare, the berserkers were masters at it. Their reputation alone was often enough to send shivers down the spines of their enemies. Imagine facing a warrior who appeared to be in a trance, eyes wild and unblinking, unfazed by the chaos around him. It's enough to make anyone think twice about sticking around for a sword fight. But here's the kicker. Much of the berserkers' fearsome reputation was built on narrative, a well-crafted story that grew with each retelling. The sagas, written centuries after the events they describe, were the ancient world's version of a campfire tale, where facts took a back seat to drama and embellishment. As any good storyteller knows, a little exaggeration goes a long way in creating legends. And let's not forget the role of the skalds, the Viking poets who spun these tales. They were the medieval PR agents, crafting stories that boosted the reputations of their patrons. A chieftain with a berserker in his ranks wasn't just feared, he was legendary, his exploits retold in verse and song. It was a masterclass in branding before the term even existed. Now, don't get me wrong, just because the berserkers weren't literally turning into bears doesn't mean they didn't have a profound impact. They were still the shark troops of the Viking world, the tip of the spear in any raid or battle. Their wild, unpredictable nature was a weapon in itself, one that no sane enemy wanted to face. But here's where the legend starts to unravel. The berserkers' unpredictability wasn't always an asset. In fact, it could be a liability. Archaeological evidence suggests that while they were effective in battle, their lack of discipline could lead to chaos. Imagine a berserker in full rage mode, unable to distinguish friend from foe. It's not the kind of thing you want in the middle of a well-coordinated attack. And then there's the question of numbers. Despite their legendary status, berserkers were never as numerous as tales might suggest. They were elite, yes, but they were also rare. Most Viking warriors were ordinary men, not superhuman fighters hopped up on hallucinogens. The berserkers were the exception, not the rule, and their exclusivity added to their mystique. So, if you're picturing hordes of berserkers charging across the battlefield, think again. They were more likely to be a small, elite group, used strategically rather than en masse. It's a bit like having a few aces up your sleeve in a poker game. You don't play them all at once, but you know they can turn the tide when it counts. The historical record also challenges the idea that berserkers were universally revered. While they were respected for their prowess, they were also feared, and at times ostracized. Their ferocity may have been an asset in war, but in peacetime, it made them dangerous neighbors. The sagas tell of berserkers who, unable to control their rage, became outcasts, wandering the land in search of battles to fight and enemies to vanquish. This duality, hero in battle, pariah at home, is a recurring theme in history, a reminder that the traits that make someone a legend in one context can be their downfall in another. It's the classic case of the warrior who can't adapt to peace, the hero whose story doesn't end with the battle. And let's not overlook the economic angle. Berserkers were expensive, a luxury that not every chieftain could afford. Forging weapons, maintaining their diet, and keeping them loyal required resources. It's a bit like maintaining a high-performance sports car. Not everyone has the means or the patience for it. The cost of keeping berserkers happy was a constant balancing act. They needed rewards for their service, and failure to deliver could lead to mutiny or abandonment. In a world where loyalty was transactional, a chieftain who couldn't meet his berserkers' demands risked losing them to a rival with deeper pockets. So, where does this leave us in our quest to separate the berserker's myth from reality? It's a tangled web, where truth and fiction intertwine, each feeding off the other. The berserkers were real, but their legend was as much a product of storytelling as it was of history, a blend of fact and fancy that continues to captivate us today. As we wrap up this section, keep in mind that the berserker's story is far from over. There's more to explore, more myths to debunk, and more truths to uncover. So stay tuned, because the next chapter promises even more revelations about these iconic warriors who lived, and often died, by the sword. And so, as the echoes of battle cries fade into the mists of time, let's take a hard look at how the berserker myth has shape-shifted and elbowed its way into modern pop culture. Spoiler alert, it's a wild ride, from the pages of medieval sagas to the pixelated chaos of video games. First stop on our tour of berserker influence, literature. These guys are the gift that keeps on giving when it comes to storytelling. We find echoes of their ferocity in J.R.R. Tolkien's Middle-earth, where characters like Beorn, the skin-changer channel that same animalistic fury. Tolkien, who was knee-deep in Norse mythology, knew how to spin a tale with just the right amount of berserker edge. And let's not forget Robert E. Howard's Conan the Barbarian, a character who practically oozes berserker energy with every swing of his sword. These stories tap into something primal, a visceral thrill that keeps readers hooked. Moving on to the silver screen, Hollywood has never been shy about borrowing from history, sometimes with all the subtlety of a Viking raid. Films like The 13th Warrior and the How to Train Your Dragon series nod to our berserk buddies, drawing on their reputation for fearlessness and fury. Even Marvel's Thor, with his Norse god roots, carries a whiff of berserker bravado, swinging Mjolnir with the kind of reckless abandon that would make any Viking proud. But let's talk about where the berserkers really hit their stride. Video games. If you've ever picked up a controller and felt the adrenaline surge of a berserker rage, thank these old-school warriors. Games like Assassin's Creed Valhalla and God of War bring the berserker spirit to life, letting players unleash chaos in a way that's both exhilarating and, let's be honest, slightly addictive. It's not just about the thrill, it's about stepping into the shoes, or bare skins, of these legendary warriors, feeling invincible, even if just for a moment. Now, let's pivot to why this myth has such staying power. It boils down to a few key ingredients: the appeal of raw power, the allure of the untamed, and the timeless fascination with the boundary between man and beast. The berserker embodies a freedom from restraint, a break from the shackles of civilization that many find intoxicating. In a world often governed by rules and routine, the berserker represents the ultimate escape, a reminder of a time when life was lived on the edge, when each day could bring glory or doom. Of course, the romanticized image of the berserker glosses over the gritty realities. In reality, life as a berserker was far from glamorous. Toll of living on the knife's edge was high, and the line between legendary hero and outcast was razor-thin. But here's the kicker. It's precisely this contradiction that makes the berserker so compelling. They were both hero and monster, and that duality resonates with our innate fascination with the flawed hero. Historically speaking, the berserker's reputation was as much about psychological warfare as physical prowess. Their terrifying presence on the battlefield was a game-changer. But in today's world, their legacy is psychological in a different way. The berserker spirit taps into our collective psyche, speaking to a part of us that yearns for a world unbound by social constraints, a fantasy where might makes right, and the weak-willed are left quaking in their boots. Yet, as we sift through the myths and realities, it's essential to remember that the berserkers were a product of their time. They emerged from a society where survival often depended on displays of strength and ferocity, where the line between man and myth was as blurred as the horizon in a Scandinavian winter. In many ways, the enduring fascination with berserkers is a reflection of our ongoing struggle to reconcile the civilized with the wild, the ordered with the chaotic. So, what's the takeaway here? The legacy of the berserkers is a testament to the power of storytelling. They remind us that history is as much about the stories we tell as the facts we know. The berserkers might not have been the invincible warriors of legend, but their story endures because it speaks to something deep within us, a longing for a time when legends were born not just from deeds, but from the telling of those deeds. In the end, the berserkers are a mirror, reflecting our own fascination with power, myth, and the human condition. They were warriors who became legends, and in that transformation, they left an indelible mark on history. So, whether you're flipping through a fantasy novel, watching a blockbuster film, or battling it out in a virtual world, remember the berserkers. They're not just relics of a bygone age. They're part of the tapestry of human imagination, a reminder that the line between myth and reality is one we cross every time we tell a story. As we close the book on the berserkers, take a moment to reflect on their legacy. They were more than just warriors. They were symbols of the untamed spirit, the wild heart that beats within us all. And that, my friends, is why their story continues to captivate, long after the last echoes of their battle cries have faded into the annals of time. Ancient Greek mythology, where gods and mortals alike had more plot twists than a soap opera on steroids. We're talking about a cultural phenomenon that kicked off around 700 BCE, in a world where science was just a toddler trying to stand up straight. Back then, if you wanted to know why the sky was blue, or what made the earth tremble, you didn't Google it. You turned to elaborate tales featuring gods with more mood swings than a caffeinated teenager. Zeus, the head honcho of Mount Olympus, was the kingpin of this divine drama club, complete with thunderbolts and an ego that could make even the biggest celebrity blush. So, what was happening around 700 BCE that gave birth to this mythological blockbuster? For starters, Greece was a patchwork quilt of city-states, each with its own quirks and ambitions. It wasn't one big happy family, but rather a collection of sibling rivalries with a penchant for philosophical debates and the occasional skirmish. The Greeks were just starting to emerge from the so-called Dark Ages, a period that was about as cheerful as it sounds. With the dawn of the Archaic period, Greece was seeing a cultural renaissance of sorts. Trade routes were opening up, Literacy was making a comeback, and people were starting to wonder if there was more to life than farming and fighting. Enter Greek mythology, a way to make sense of the chaos, to explain the unexplainable, and maybe even to keep the kids entertained before bedtime. These stories were the ancient equivalent of a blockbuster movie franchise, spinning tales of gods and heroes that were as educational as they were entertaining. They explained why the seasons changed, thanks Demeter and Persephone, why the sun rose and set, looking at you Helios, and even why echoes existed, shout out to Echo and Narcissus. In a time when natural disasters were as mysterious as they were terrifying, these myths provided a comforting narrative to hold on to. Zeus, the god with a lightning bolt and a penchant for meddling in human affairs, was the star of this celestial soap. He was the ultimate authority figure. Think of him as the CEO of the cosmos, but with a lot more family drama and fewer board meetings. His power plays and romantic escapades were the stuff of legend, literally. And let's not forget his siblings. Poseidon, who had a thing for causing shipwrecks, and Hades, who ran the underworld like a gloomy theme park. These gods were like a divine version of a reality TV family, each with their own quirks, feuds, and let's be honest, questionable decision-making skills. But these myths weren't just for entertainment. They were political tools as well. The stories reinforced social norms and political structures, justifying the power of kings and the status quo. If Zeus could rule the universe with an iron fist, or a thunderbolt, as it were, then surely a mortal king could rule his people. The myths also served as a shared cultural touchstone, uniting the Greeks in a common heritage even when they were busy bickering over land or trade. To get a sense of how these myths permeated daily life, look no further than the ancient Olympic Games, first held in 776 BCE. While the modern version is all about athletic prowess and global unity, the ancient games were as much a religious festival as a sporting event. Held in honor of Zeus, they were a time for athletes to compete, sure, but also for participants to gather and celebrate their shared mythology. Winners didn't just take home a medal. They were celebrated as heroes, akin to the demigods of legend. The power of Greek mythology also lay in its adaptability. As the Greeks spread out across the Mediterranean, founding colonies and coming into contact with other cultures, they took their stories with them, tweaking them as needed. Different regions and city-states might emphasize different gods or legends, but the core narratives remained a unifying force. Thus, these myths were as much a tool for cultural cohesion as they were tales of divine daring-do. Yet, for all their grandeur, these myths also showcased the Greeks' ability to laugh at themselves. With gods who were just as flawed and fickle as the people who worshipped them, the myths reflected a reality that was both divine and deeply human. The Greeks understood that life was unpredictable, that the gods' favor was as changeable as the weather, and that sometimes best you could do was tell a good story and hope for the best. So, the next time you hear about Zeus turning into a swan, or any other bizarre transformation, remember that these myths were the ancient world's answer to life's big questions. They offered explanations, entertainment, and even a bit of satire about the human condition. They were the original epic sagas, full of action, intrigue, and a touch of divine comedy. And in a world as unpredictable as ancient Greece, sometimes a good story was the best guide you could have. While those myths spun yarns to make sense of the cosmos, they were also the ancient equivalent of a business plan. Let's talk about the economic juggernaut that was Greek mythology, an industry before industries were even a thing. Picture Athens, not just as the cradle of democracy, but as the Vegas of the ancient world, where the house always won, and mythology was the high-stakes poker game everyone wanted in on. Start with the temples, those architectural wonders that put the grand in grandeur. The Parthenon, dedicated to Athena, was as much a display of wealth and power as it was a place of worship. Built around 447 BCE, it wasn't just a religious site. It was a statement, costing about 469 silver talents. That's a cool $7 billion in today's money. Imagine the kind of fundraising gala you'd need for that. These temples weren't just spiritual hubs. They were banks, storage vaults for the city's treasures. Athenian leaders knew that in times of war or peace, a bit of divine intervention, or at least the belief in it, could tip the scales. Now, let's not forget the Panathenaic Games, Athens' answer to the Olympic Games. Unlike today's Olympics, where the athletes might get a lucrative shoe deal, winners at the Panathinaik Games took home amphorae full of olive oil, a prize as valuable as gold in those days. The Games were a costly affair, but the return on investment was immense. They drew spectators from all over the Greek world, boosting local economies. Merchants, innkeepers, and artisans cashed in on the influx of tourists, all eager to bask in the glory of Athena and maybe snag a souvenir or two. Speaking of tourism, Delphi was the ancient world's must-visit destination. The Oracle of Delphi was like a Yelp review, fortune cookie, and Twitter trend all rolled into one. Pilgrims from every corner of the Mediterranean flocked to seek advice from the Pythia, the high priestess who channeled the god Apollo. The catch: these consultations weren't free. Fees were steep, and offerings were part of the package. Delphi's economy thrived, thanks to this divine advisory service. And let's not forget the local industries that sprang up. Inns, eateries, and markets all flourished, proving that where there was a god, there was a way. But here's the kicker. While these myths inspired awe and devotion, they also served as a form of social control. The economic benefits were clear, but the political implications were equally significant. Those who controlled the temples, and by extension, the gods' narratives, held immense power. They dictated not just religious practices, but also political policies. Who needed a constitution when you had a divine mandate? Yet, it wasn't all smooth sailing. Maintaining these grandiose structures and festivals required a steady cash flow, and that's where the taxman came in. Wealthy citizens, much like today's philanthropists, were expected to fund public projects, including temples and games. This wasn't altruism. It was a social contract. You either paid up or risked losing your social standing. And if the gods were pleased, maybe they'd bless you with good fortune, or at least spare you from their wrath. In a society where the divine and the mortal were inextricably linked, mythology was the ultimate marketing campaign. It sold not just the gods' stories, but also the city-state's prowess and prosperity. Every statue, every temple, every festival was a testament to the city's wealth and influence, a reminder that, in the end, it wasn't just about pleasing the gods. It was about keeping the economy and the social order afloat. Let's not romanticize it too much, though. For all its beauty and grandeur, this was a world where human sacrifice wasn't just metaphorical. The cost of maintaining these myths was high, both financially and socially. Still, in a time when the line between myth and reality was as blurred as a watercolor, the Greeks found a way to make their stories work for them. They turned divine tales into hard currency, proving that even in the ancient world, the greatest story ever told was the one that kept the money rolling in. So next time you ponder the ruins of an ancient temple, remember it's not just a relic of the past. It's a reminder of a world where mythology was both a religion and a business model. And in a place where gods walked among men, the real miracle was how cleverly they managed to keep the whole show running. Who knew that the road to Olympus was paved with talent fees and olive oil? Keep that in mind as we delve deeper into the Greek mythological economy in our next session. Just as Greek mythology was a financial juggernaut, it also doubled as the original edutainment for young Greeks. Long before the term was coined by modern marketers. Imagine growing up in a world where bedtime stories were less about fluffy bunnies and more about cautionary tales featuring hubris and heroics. These weren't just yarns spun to lull you to sleep. They were intricate narratives designed to mold the minds of the future philosophers, warriors, and leaders of Greece. Let's start with the moral lessons. Greek myths were like ancient TED talks, complete with moral quandaries and ethical debates. Take the story of Achilles. For instance, this wasn't just the tale of a guy who could run really fast in sandals. It was a complex narrative about the fleeting nature of glory and the high cost of hubris. Achilles, the invincible warrior with just one vulnerable spot, a literal Achilles heel, if you will, was a walking, fighting metaphor for the idea that no one is invincible, not even heroes. His story was a masterclass in the consequences of pride and rage, with a final act that left audiences pondering the price of vengeance. But the Greeks weren't just about tales of valor and warfare. They had a knack for weaving in cautionary tales that were as educational as they were entertaining. Enter Icarus, the original daredevil. His story is a perennial favorite, not just for its dramatic flair, but for its enduring lesson. Flying too close to the sun is a bad idea, especially when your wings are made of wax. In a society that valued moderation, a concept known as sarfrasine, Icarus was the poster child for what happens when you ignore sound advice and get a little too ambitious. His tragic fall wasn't just a story of personal failure. It was a lesson for every risk-taker in the audience. Now, if you think these myths were just for the kids, think again. They were woven into the very fabric of Greek education. The Greeks were big on oratory and debate, skills that were honed by engaging with these mythological narratives. Imagine being a young Athenian, debating whether Odysseus was a cunning hero or a deceitful trickster. These were not idle questions. They were exercises in critical thinking, teaching young minds to analyze, argue, and persuade, skills that were as valuable then as they are now. And let's not forget the societal values these stories reinforced. In a world without the internet or even the printing press, myths were the original viral content, spreading ideas and norms faster than you could say Homeric epic. Think of them as the ancient Greek version of a meme, but with more gravitas. The values of courage, honor, and respect for the gods weren't just ideals. They were embedded in the stories themselves, ensuring that each retelling reinforced the social fabric. But here's the kicker. These stories weren't just about teaching lessons. They were also about preparing future leaders. The heroes of Greek mythology were often depicted as paragons of virtue, strong, brave, wise, and occasionally flawed. They were role models, albeit with a few divine quirks. Take Theseus, for example, the hero who slayed the Minotaur and navigated the labyrinthine maze of Crete. His story wasn't just an adventure, it was a blueprint for leadership. He demonstrated the virtues of intelligence, bravery, and the importance of having a ball of string handy if you ever find yourself in a maze. Of course, these narratives weren't static. They evolved over time, just like their audiences. Different regions and city-states had their own spins on the classic tales, adapting them to reflect local values and priorities. In some versions, heroes were more altruistic. In others, they were more cunning. This adaptability made the myths a dynamic educational tool, one that could be tailored to fit the needs of the moment. But let's not get too misty-eyed about it. While these myths were powerful tools for education and socialization, they weren't without their dark sides. The stories often reinforced existing hierarchies and power structures, with gods and heroes who were as capricious as they were powerful. In a world where divine favor could make or break a king, these myths were as much about control as they were about enlightenment. They taught obedience to authority, both divine and mortal, ensuring that everyone knew their place in the cosmic pecking order. And yet, for all their grandeur and moralizing, Greek myths were deeply human. They acknowledged the flaws and frailties of both gods and men, offering a mirror to society that was as honest as it was fantastical. In a world where the line between myth and reality was as thin as a toga, these stories offered a way to explore the human condition, to question the nature of heroism, and to ponder the complexities of fate and free will. So, next time you hear about the exploits of Hercules or the tragic fate of Oedipus, remember that these weren't just tales spun for entertainment. They were the educational framework of ancient Greece, a means of transmitting values, shaping minds, and preparing the next generation for a world that was as unpredictable as the whims of the gods themselves. In the end, these myths were more than stories. They were the very foundation of a society that valued wisdom as much as it did valor. And in a time when the world was as mysterious as it was dangerous, that was no small feat. Stay tuned, because we're not done exploring the labyrinth of Greek mythology just yet. And so, as the Greeks spun their tales to educate and entertain, they were also busy chiseling those same stories into marble, painting them on pottery, and performing them on stage. Because why just tell a story when you can turn it into a multi-sensory extravaganza? This was ancient Greece, after all, where art and myth were the ultimate power couple, flaunting their influence like the Kardashians of the classical world. Take the Parthenon marbles, for instance. These were no mere decorative pieces. They were a declaration of cultural supremacy. Carved around 447-432 BCE, the marbles were part of the Parthenon, that iconic temple dedicated to Athena, the goddess of wisdom and warfare. Think of them as the ancient world's version of a blockbuster movie poster. Only instead of CGI, they had master sculptors, and instead of popcorn, there were philosophical debates. These sculptures depicted mythological events with such dynamism that you could almost hear the clash of shields and the roar of divine laughter. Talk about making stone come alive. But let's not romanticize it too much. These artistic masterpieces weren't just about showing off Greek creativity. They were political propaganda of the highest order. The Parthenon was built during the height of the Athenian Empire, a time when Athens flexed its muscles more than a bodybuilder at a gym. The message was clear. Athens was the cultural and political center of the Hellenic world, and its myths were the stories everyone should be talking about. The artistic innovation was undeniable, but so was the underlying power play. It was a visual statement that said, we're not just telling stories, we're shaping the narrative, our narrative. And it wasn't just the grand structures that carried these stories. Everyday items, like pottery, became canvases for mythological scenes. Picture this, a Greek vase, circa 500 BCE, featuring Hercules wrestling the Nemean lion, every muscle and sinew captured in exquisite detail. These weren't just household items, they were conversation starters, the ancient equivalent of that art piece you hang in your living room to impress guests. Pottery scenes were like the ancient Greek version of a comic book, with heroes and gods battling it out in dramatic fashion, each piece a snapshot of a myth frozen in time. But why pottery? Well, it was practical. Pottery was used for everything from storing olive oil to holding wine at a symposium, those philosophical drinking parties that were half TED talk, half frat party. This everyday art form ensured that myths were as much a part of daily life as they were of grand temples. The scenes depicted were often chosen for their moral lessons or heroic deeds, and they served as constant reminders of the values and virtues that were so important to Greek society. It was art with a purpose, and it filled the mundane with the magnificent. Now let's talk about the theater, a place where myths truly came to life. The Greeks loved their drama, and not just the kind involving gods and monsters. The theater was a communal experience, a place where citizens gathered to watch plays that were as much about entertainment as they were about civic education. From the tragic works of Sophocles to the comedic jabs of Aristophanes, Greek theater explored the depths of mythological tales, using them as a mirror to reflect societal issues. Consider Oedipus Rex, that cheerful tale of patricide and incest. It wasn't just a story to shock and awe. It was a deep dive into the complexities of fate and free will, a theme that resonated with an audience all too familiar with unpredictable divine whims. The theater's open-air design meant that the emotional weight of these stories was amplified by the natural world, with the elements adding their own dramatic flair. It was immersive theater long before the term became a hipster buzzword. But here's where it gets interesting. While these plays were steeped in mythological lore, they were also vehicles for social commentary. Playwrights weren't just retelling ancient tales, they were questioning societal norms, probing ethical dilemmas, and challenging the status quo. It was a subtle yet powerful way to engage the public in conversations about morality, governance, and the human condition. And it provided a platform for dissent in a society where direct confrontation with authority could be, well, ill-advised. Of course, not every artistic endeavor was a grand philosophical statement. Some were simply about the joy of creation and the beauty of the human form. Greek sculpture, with its focus on idealized beauty, celebrated the divine in the everyday. The precise proportions and lifelike details of statues like the Discobolus, the discus thrower, showcased the Greeks' obsession with harmony and balance, embodying the ideal of kallikagathia, the balance of the good and the beautiful. But let's not get too caught up in the aesthetics without addressing the darker side of this artistic legacy. Many of these masterpieces were created under conditions that were less than idyllic. Slavery was a harsh reality of ancient Greek society, and much of the labor that went into building those grand temples and crafting those exquisite sculptures was done by individuals who didn't exactly have a say in the matter. The glory of Greek art, like many achievements throughout history, came at a cost, a reminder that beauty and brutality often walk hand in hand. Moreover, while Greek art celebrated the divine and the heroic, it also reinforced societal hierarchies. The gods, with their flawless forms and dramatic poses, were a constant reminder of the ideal that humanity could aspire to but never truly reach. The myths depicted in these artworks were as much about maintaining the status quo as they were about celebrating creativity. They were stories of power and dominance, reflected in the art that adorned both public spaces and private homes. And yet, for all its complexities, Greek art and mythology have left an indelible mark on the world. Their influence can be seen in the Renaissance revival of classical ideals, the neoclassical architecture of government buildings, and even in modern cinema's penchant for epic storytelling. These ancient tales, with their blend of grandeur and grit, continue to captivate us, reminding us that while the gods may have retreated to the pages of history, their stories are still very much alive. So, as we admire the artistic legacy of Greek mythology, let's remember that these weren't just stories etched in stone or painted on pottery. They were a reflection of a society grappling with the same questions we face today, about power, morality, and the human experience. And while the ancient Greeks may have had a penchant for drama and divine theatrics, they also understood that art and myth were powerful tools for shaping reality, a lesson that continues to resonate across the ages. Stay tuned, because in the next part of our journey, we'll explore how these stories traveled beyond Greece, spreading their influence far and wide in a cultural exchange that would shape the ancient world. From the shores of Italy to the sands of Egypt, Greek mythology embarked on a journey that would ensure its legacy for millennia. But that's a tale for another time. And so, as the myths packed their metaphorical bags and set sail from Greece, they embarked on a cultural world tour that would make even the most jaded celebrity envious. These ancient stories, steeped in divine drama and human folly, found new homes in distant lands, from the marble-clad cities of Rome to the bustling bazaars of Alexandria. It turns out, when it comes to storytelling, the Greeks were the original influencers, minus the Instagram filters. Let's start with Rome, where the gods got a bit of a rebrand, like an old band with a new name but the same hit songs. The Romans, never ones to shy away from a cultural mashup, adopted Greek mythology with the enthusiasm of a kid grabbing free candy. Zeus became Jupiter, Hera turned into Juno, and so on. It was like a divine witness protection program, but the narratives remained largely intact. The Romans had a knack for taking what they liked and making it their own, much like their approach to architecture, law, and, well, pretty much everything else. By the time Virgil penned the Aeneid, around 19 BCE, Greek myths had become foundational to Roman culture, serving as both inspiration and justification for Rome's imperial ambitions. And then there was Egypt, where the Greeks and their myths were greeted with a mix of fascination and adaptation. After Alexander the Great's conquest in 332 BCE, the Ptolemaic dynasty took the throne, blending Greek and Egyptian traditions. The Greeks were enamored with Egypt's ancient mystique, and their mythology reflected this cross-cultural exchange. Isis and Osiris found counterparts in Demeter and Dionysus, respectively, showcasing a syncretism that would have made even the most dedicated fusion cuisine chef proud. But the real magic happened not just in the grand cities, but also through the mundane, in the trade routes that crisscrossed the ancient world. Greek myths traveled along with merchants and sailors, carried in the form of ceramic wares, text, and oral tales. By the time you hit the 1st century CE, these stories had spread like a particularly catchy tune, resonating from the shores of the Black Sea to the edges of the Indian subcontinent. Greek stories had become the ancient world's biggest earworm, impossible to shake off, and endlessly hummed by cultures far and wide. Fast forward to today, and these myths are still strutting their stuff, albeit in more modern garb. Take Hollywood, for instance, where Greek mythology has been a perennial favorite. From the sword and sandal epics of the 1950s to the CGI-laden adventures of today, these ancient tales have been adapted, rebooted, and sequelized more times than you can count. Who needs originality when you have Olympus-level drama at your fingertips? Zeus, with his thunderbolts and philandering ways, could give any modern antihero a run for his money, while the tragic love story of Orpheus and Eurydice remains a tearjerker for the ages. It's as if the Hollywood sign itself is a modern-day oracle, still channeling the timeless appeal of these classic stories. Then there's the world of branding, where companies have been getting a marketing boost from Greek gods and heroes for decades. Nike, named after the Greek goddess of victory, swooshes across billboards worldwide, while Pandora jewelry plays on the allure of the mysterious barks that started it all. Even Amazon's logo, with its smile-like arrow, nods subtly to the Amazons, those fierce warrior women who made Hercules break a sweat. It seems the gods have found a lucrative side gig in the corporate world, proving that their market appeal is as eternal as their myths. In psychology, these stories have also left their mark. Sigmund Freud, that old curmudgeon of psychoanalysis, couldn't resist the allure of Greek mythology, coining the term Oedipus complex to describe a certain set of familial feelings that would make any Thanksgiving dinner awkward. It turns out the Greeks had a knack for understanding human nature in all its messy glory, long before therapy was a thing. Their myths continue to provide a lens through which we examine our innermost desires, fears, and follies, proving that while the gods might have been a tad melodramatic, they also had some profound insights into the human psyche. So why do these ancient tales still capture our imagination? Why do they echo through our movies, our brands, and even our dreams? Perhaps it's because, at their core, these myths explore the timeless themes of power, love, and human folly. They delve into the complexities of the human condition, reflecting our hopes and fears, our triumphs and tragedies. Just as Achilles' heel reminds us of our vulnerabilities, and Icarus warns us of the dangers of overreaching, these stories resonate with our own experiences and aspirations. Greek mythology invites us to ponder the dualities of life, the divine and the mortal, the heroic and the flawed, the real and the imagined. It asks us to consider the nature of fate and free will, to question the limits of power and the cost of ambition. In a world where the line between myth and reality is often as blurred as a watercolor, these ancient tales offer a way to make sense of the chaos, to find meaning in the madness. In the end, Greek mythology is more than just a collection of stories. It's a testament to the enduring power of narrative. It's a reminder that even in a world as unpredictable as ancient Greece, where gods and mortals dance to the tune of fate, a good story could offer a guiding light. As we continue to tell and retell these myths, reshaping them to fit our ever-changing world, we celebrate the creativity and resilience of the human spirit, a spirit that, like the gods themselves, is both timeless and ever-evolving. So, as we bid farewell to the Olympian pantheon and their mortal counterparts, let's raise a metaphorical amphora of olive oil in their honor. Here's to the myths that have outlived their creators, to the stories that continue to shape our world, and to the timeless themes that remind us of our shared humanity. In a world where the echoes of ancient Greece still reverberate, we find solace in the knowledge that while the characters may change, the essence of the story remains the same. And in the end, isn't that the true magic of mythology? Hannibal, the famed Carthaginian general, wasn't just some warlord with a penchant for elephants and dramatic mountain crossings. His thirst for Roman blood was practically baked into his DNA. You see, Hannibal was born around 247 BC in Carthage, a bustling hub of trade and political intrigue perched on the North African coast. Carthage was like the Wall Street of the ancient Mediterranean, with ships coming and going, merchants haggling, and politicians scheming. Young Hannibal grew up in the shadow of this vibrant chaos, under the tutelage of his father, Hamilcar Barca. Now, Hamilcar wasn't just any dad. He was a seasoned general with a grudge bigger than a war elephant against Rome. This wasn't your typical father-son bonding over fishing trips or weekend hikes. Nope, Hamilcar's idea of quality time involved instilling a deep-seated loathing for Rome in his offspring. Legend has it, Hamilcar made little Hannibal swear an oath of eternal enmity against Rome at the tender age of 9. Imagine your dad making you promise to hate an entire civilization while you're still losing baby teeth. Talk about family expectations. But why all the drama? Well, let's rewind a bit. Carthage and Rome were the heavyweight fighters of the Mediterranean, and the First Punic War had left Carthage battered and bruised. Hamilcar, a veteran of that war, wasn't exactly ready to let bygones be bygones. He saw the Iberian Peninsula, what we now call Spain, as the perfect launchpad for Carthaginian revenge. It was rich in resources, silver mines galore, and conveniently positioned to poke the Roman bear right in its Italian heartland. In 237 BC, Hamilcar packed his bags and took his family, including young Hannibal, to Iberia. This was no leisurely family vacation. Hamilcar was there to build an empire, one mine and one city at a time. He set up shop in the town of Gades, modern-day Cadiz, and got to work expanding Carthaginian influence. It was here that Hannibal got his first taste of military life, and boy, did he take to it like a duck to water. By the time he was in his late teens, Hannibal was already leading troops into battle, learning the art of war from a master tactician. Meanwhile, back in Carthage, the political climate was like a pressure cooker. The city was still licking its wounds from the First Punic War, and there were more factions than at a high school cafeteria. The ruling elite, the oligarchs, were busy lining their pockets, while the general populace grumbled about taxes and losses. Carthage was a republic, but not the kind you'd want to write home about. The Senate was a den of intrigue, with power struggles that would make Game of Thrones look like a tea party. Hannibal's family, the Barcas, were a powerhouse in this Byzantine political mess. They had money, they had influence, and thanks to Hamilcar, they had a strategic foothold in Iberia. The Barcas weren't just playing the game, they were setting the rules. Hamilcar's ambitious expansion in Iberia was a clear middle finger to Rome, but it also served as a power play within Carthage. The more territory and resources the Barcas controlled, the stronger their hand in the city's political roulette. As for young Hannibal, he wasn't just a pawn in his father's grand scheme. He was being groomed to be the tip of the Carthaginian spear. The oath he swore might sound like dramatic flair, but it was deadly serious. For Hannibal, Rome wasn't just an enemy, it was his raison d'etre. Every battle he fought, every city he captured, was a step towards avenging Carthage's honor. And boy, did he have the chops for it. His mid-20s, Hannibal was already making a name for himself as a brilliant military leader. He had a knack for strategy and a flair for the audacious, traits that would soon become his trademark. But beneath the bravado and battlefield genius lay a shrewd political mind. Hannibal understood the stakes of his family's gamble in Iberia. He knew that to challenge Rome, he needed more than just soldiers. He needed alliances, resources, and a strategic masterstroke. And so, as Hannibal sharpened his skills and honed his hatred, the stage was set for one of history's most legendary rivalries. The Roman Republic, with its legions and laws, versus Hannibal Barca, the man with a vendetta and a herd of elephants. It was a clash for the ages, born from the ambitions of a father and the oath of a son. Little did Rome know, but the kid from Carthage was coming for them, and he was bringing the Alps with him, while Rome was busy basking in its own glow. Unaware of the storm brewing across the Mediterranean, Hannibal was orchestrating a circus of logistics that would make any modern-day event planner break into a cold sweat. Assembling an army to take on Rome was no small feat, and Hannibal wasn't about to do it by halves. Enter stage left, 37 elephants. Yes, you heard that right. 37 of these hulking beasts, which were the ancient equivalent of tanks, minus the reliability. Now, let's get one thing straight. Elephants in war were as much about shock and awe as they were about practicality. Sure, they looked majestic and terrifying, charging across the battlefield and scattering enemy troops like bowling pins. But in reality, they were high-maintenance, moody, and quite frankly, not as war-ready as one might hope. Imagine trying to convince a multi-ton animal to traverse the hostile terrain of the Alps. Spoiler alert, it's not a walk in the park. So why bother with elephants at all? Well, part of it was the psychological edge. Picture this. You're a Roman soldier minding your own business when suddenly you see an elephant, a creature you've only heard about in myths and legends, barreling towards you. It's enough to make even the bravest legionary reconsider his life choices. Plus, elephants were a status symbol, a way for Hannibal to showcase Carthage's might and exotic resources. It was like bringing a luxury yacht to a naval battle. Impressive, but not always the most practical. Assembling this diverse army was no small task, and it wasn't just about the elephants. Hannibal's forces were a veritable United Nations of the ancient world, featuring soldiers from across the Carthaginian Empire and beyond. We're talking Iberians, Gauls, Numidians, and Libyans, each bringing their own unique skills and fighting styles to the table. This eclectic mix was both a strength and a logistical nightmare. Coordinating such a varied group required more than just military know-how. It took diplomacy, charisma, and the occasional promise of plunder. Hannibal's army wasn't just a collection of soldiers, it was a mobile economy. Feeding, arming, and paying these troops was a Herculean task. The financial costs were staggering, even for a powerhouse like Carthage. Keep in mind that this was a time when soldiers expected to be compensated not just with coin, but with loot and land. Hannibal had to ensure a steady stream of resources to keep his men loyal and motivated, all while plotting a route that would catch the Romans off guard. Ah, the route. Here's where Hannibal's strategic genius really shines. Instead of taking the predictable path through the coastal regions, he opted for a daring march over the Alps. This wasn't just audacious, it was borderline insane. But therein lay the brilliance. The Romans, confident in their naval superiority, never anticipated an overland invasion from the north. Hannibal's choice was the ultimate curveball, catching Rome with its proverbial toga down. Of course, choosing this path came with its own set of challenges. The Alps were no mere hills. They were towering, treacherous mountains with unpredictable weather and hostile tribes. Crossing them with an army, let alone with elephants, was akin to threading a needle in a hurricane. Yet Hannibal was undeterred, driven by a mix of ambition, necessity, and a dash of madness. This was less a military maneuver and more a statement piece. Hannibal was coming for Rome, and he was doing it his way. The journey across the Alps demonstrated Hannibal's ability to adapt and improvise. He faced avalanches, frostbite, and treacherous paths that could swallow a man whole. Many of his men succumbed to the elements, and the elephants. Let's just say they didn't quite thrive in the alpine conditions. Yet, against all odds, Hannibal persevered, emerging on the other side with enough of his forces intact to strike fear into the heart of Italy. The financial and human cost of this adventure was immense, but it set the stage for one of the most legendary military campaigns in history. Hannibal's audacity, the diverse composition of his army, and the sheer improbability of his alpine crossing became the stuff of legend. But let's not romanticize it too much. Behind every tale of glory lies a trail of hardship, sacrifice, and not-so-glamorous realities. Hannibal was a master of strategy, but he was also a gambler, risking it all on a perilous journey for the chance to bring Rome to its knees. As Hannibal and his army descended into Italy, the Romans finally realized the scale of what they were up against. The Carthaginian general had crossed the Alps, defying both geography and common sense to knock on Rome's doorstep. Yet, despite the grandeur of his achievement, the challenges were far from over. Ahead lay battles that would test the mettle of both Hannibal and his diverse coalition. But for now, let's pause and appreciate the audacity it took to bring a herd of elephants over the Alps. Because sometimes, history's greatest feats are born from a mix of brilliance, bravado, and a touch of madness. Hannibal's descent into Italy was like the opening act of a rock concert, with the Alps as the improbable stage and 37 elephants as the headlining act. But let's not kid ourselves. This was less about pyrotechnics and more about survival. The Alps, with their jagged peaks and bone-chilling winds, weren't just a backdrop. They were the dragon Hannibal had to slay. Picture it, a motley crew of soldiers, elephants, and camp followers trudging through snow-dusted passes, every step a gamble with gravity and frostbite. The romance, it's there, sure. But so is the grit, the mud, and the very real possibility of tumbling into an icy abyss. Now, let's talk about those elephants, because really, they're the unexpected VIPs of this saga. Despite their less-than-ideal alpine credentials, these creatures were more than just Hannibal's ancient version of shark troops. They were the literal elephant in the room, a logistical nightmare that also doubled as a morale-boosting spectacle. Picture a soldier weary from the climb, glancing back to see a lumbering elephant, snorting steam like a prehistoric locomotive. It's hard not to feel a bit of awe, maybe even a touch of camaraderie, knowing you're part of a spectacle that will echo through history. But camaraderie wasn't just reserved for the elephants. Hannibal, with the deftness of a master conductor, managed to keep his ragtag orchestra of soldiers from different cultures, languages, and fighting styles playing in harmony. The key, a mix of charisma, cunning, and a healthy dose of pragmatism. Hannibal knew that in the face of starvation, freezing temperatures, and the ever-present threat of Roman scouts, unity was non-negotiable. He was like an ancient motivational speaker, rallying his troops with promises of glory and loot, carrots that dangled just beyond the snow-capped horizon. And oh, the challenges they faced. From avalanches that could swallow an entire battalion, to narrow mountain paths where a single misstep could send you plummeting to your demise, This journey was a masterclass in adversity. The weather was a fickle beast, with snowstorms that seemed to come out of nowhere, as if the gods themselves were intent on testing Carthaginian resolve. Yet, despite these hardships, Hannibal's army trudged on, driven by a mix of fear, loyalty, and the intoxicating aroma of impending conquest. It's easy to romanticize this Alpine crossing as a noble quest, a David and Goliath tale of one man's defiance against the Roman juggernaut. But let's not forget the harsh realities. The human cost was staggering. Thousands of Hannibal's men never made it to Italy, claimed by the mountain's unforgiving embrace. And the elephants. Let's just say that the Alps were not an ideal habitat for these tropical giants. Many of them succumbed to the cold and treacherous terrain, their majestic forms eventually becoming part of the frozen landscape. Yet for those who survived, the experience forged a bond stronger than any military oath. The shared ordeal became a badge of honor, a testament to their resilience and Hannibal's indomitable will. It was less about conquering the Alps and more about emerging on the other side, battered, bruised, but unbroken. Hannibal's ability to navigate this treacherous path wasn't just a testament to his strategic genius. It was a reflection of his understanding of human nature. He knew that the promise of glory was a powerful motivator, but shared suffering could weld disparate groups into a single, cohesive force. Economically, the crossing was a gamble of epic proportions. The financial strain on Carthage was immense, with the cost of provisioning such an expedition rivaling the GDP of a small city-state. Hannibal had to be both a general and an accountant, ensuring that his army didn't just survive, but thrived enough to pose a credible threat to Rome. The stakes were astronomical. Failure wasn't just a personal setback, it was a potential death knell for Carthage's ambitions. As Hannibal finally led his forces into the Italian heartland, the Romans were left scrambling, their worst fears realized. A Carthaginian army, battle-hardened and guided by a man with a score to settle, was at their doorstep. The audacity of Hannibal's Alpine crossing had turned the tables, shifting the battle from the sea to the land, from Rome's strength to its vulnerability. But this is where the story takes a turn. Crossing the Alps was just the beginning, the prologue to a series of battles that would test Hannibal's tactical brilliance against Rome's military might. The real challenge lay ahead, in a land where Roman legions were as numerous as the stars, and as relentless as the tide. Yet for now, let's pause and marvel at the sheer audacity of Hannibal's undertaking. It was a feat of endurance and ingenuity, a testament to the human spirit's capacity to defy the odds. But as history would soon reveal, greatest battles were yet to come, and Hannibal's ultimate legacy was far from assured. As Hannibal set foot into the Italian theater, it was as if the maestro had just stepped onto the grandest stage of his career. The Alps, with their icy defiance, were behind him, and before him lay the sprawling Roman Republic, ripe for the taking. But here's the kicker. Hannibal didn't just plan to beat the Romans with brute force. He intended to dismantle their psyche, one battle at a time. Let's start with Lake Trasimene in 217 BC, a symphony of strategic brilliance that left Romans with a collective case of shell shock. Picture this. The Romans, led by Consul Gaius Flaminius, were marching with the confidence of a teenager who just got his driver's license. But Hannibal, he was the cunning fox wading in the shadows. He set up an ambush so perfect it was like watching Shakespeare before Shakespeare was cool. Hannibal's army, concealed in the hills around the lake, lay in wait like a coiled spring. As the Romans entered the narrow pass, it was a tactical chokehold, no maneuverability, no escape. Hannibal's forces pounced, turning the Roman legions into a panicked horde. A staggering 15,000 Roman soldiers met their end that day, while Hannibal's losses were minimal. The psychological blow was massive. Rome had been outsmarted, and the message was clear. Hannibal was not merely a general, he was a maestro of mind games. But the real piece de resistance was yet to come. Enter the Battle of Cannae in 216 BC, often hailed as the zenith of Hannibal's military genius. Here, Hannibal didn't just win. He conducted a tactical opera that would be studied for millennia. Imagine a battlefield as a chessboard, with Hannibal as the grandmaster. He employed the double envelopment maneuver, a tactic so audacious it was like playing 4D chess while the Romans were stuck on checkers. The setup was genius. Hannibal placed his weakest troops in the center, baiting the Romans to push forward in overconfidence. As the Romans committed their forces, the Carthaginian flanks, composed of hardened veterans, swung around like the jaws of a bear trap. By day's end, the Roman army was decimated. Estimates suggest up to 70,000 Roman soldiers perished, a catastrophe of epic proportions. Hannibal's casualties, a mere fraction. It was a slaughter so complete, it was as if Hannibal had rewritten the rules of warfare. Yet amidst this symphony of chaos, Hannibal's real weapon was fear. He knew that battles weren't just fought on fields, they were waged in the mind. Rome, the invincible juggernaut, was suddenly vulnerable. The Senate was jittery, the populace was panicked, and the Roman legions, once seen as guards of war, now appeared disturbingly mortal. Hannibal had become the boogeyman of Roman nightmares, a specter haunting their every move. But let's pump the brakes a bit. Hannibal wasn't some mythical warlock casting spells to win battles. He was a strategist par excellence, but not invincible. After Cannae, he faced the harsh reality of sustaining an army deep in enemy territory. Maintaining over 30,000 troops in Italy wasn't just a question of logistics. It was a financial headache that would give any modern CFO a sleepless night. Feeding, arming, and paying this diverse coalition was akin to running a multinational corporation with a perpetual cash flow problem. Economically, the strain was immense. Carthage, despite its wealth, was like a parent with a kid's college tuition looming. Resources were finite and dwindling fast. Hannibal had to rely on plunder and local support, but even that had limits. Each campaign season was a gamble, with the stakes steadily rising. The Romans, for their part, started to adapt, employing a strategy of attrition, avoiding direct confrontations, and slowly suffocating Hannibal's supply lines. The myth of Hannibal as an unstoppable force, while alluring, dismisses the gritty reality of his campaign. He was a man, not a demigod, and his challenges were as monumental as his victories. The Roman Senate, while shaken, wasn't about to roll over and play dead. They regrouped, adapted their strategies, and slowly turned the tide. Hannibal's legendary status was both a blessing and a curse. It made him a target, the man the Romans had to defeat at all costs. And let's talk about the human side of this saga. Hannibal's army, though victorious, was a melting pot of cultures and languages, each with its own expectations and grievances. Keeping such a diverse group united was as complex as the battles themselves. Hannibal had to be part general, part diplomat, navigating the intricate web of alliances, promises, and occasional mutinies. His charisma was his currency, a tool as vital as his sword. The psychological warfare Hannibal waged was a masterpiece of manipulation, exploiting Roman fears and weaknesses. But it was a double-edged sword. As Hannibal's legend grew, so did the Roman resolve. They began to see him not just as a threat, but as a rallying point, a reason to unite against a common enemy. The Roman spirit, though battered, was unbroken, and as history would show, that spirit was a force to be reckoned with. In the end, Hannibal's Italian campaign was a lesson in the complexities of war. It was about more than just battles and victories. It was about strategy, psychology, and the delicate balance of power. Hannibal's genius lay not just in his tactics, but in his understanding of human nature. He knew that fear was a powerful ally, but he also understood its limitations. As the dust settled on Cannae, Rome was left to pick up the pieces, its legions humbled but far from defeated. Hannibal, the man who dared to challenge the Roman Republic on its home turf, had proven his mettle. Yet, the road ahead was fraught with challenges, each step a reminder that even the greatest generals face their own battles within. The war was far from over, and Hannibal's legacy was still being written, one skirmish at a time. The psychological games continued as the Romans, licking their wounds, began to play a longer game. Hannibal, with his dwindling resources, found himself in a chess match with an opponent that refused to yield. The battles of the mind raged on, each side probing for weaknesses, each move a calculated risk. The stage was set for the next act in this epic drama, with Hannibal as both the protagonist and the antagonist, a hero to some, a villain to others. But as history would reveal, the true measure of a man isn't in his victories alone, but in how he faces the trials that follow. And for Hannibal, those trials were just beginning. As Hannibal found himself caught in the endless game of cat and mouse with the Romans, he must have realized that the tide was slowly turning against him. The Romans, like a boxer who had taken a few too many hits, were now ducking and weaving, avoiding direct confrontation while working on a comeback strategy. The war of attrition was on, and Hannibal was running out of time, money, and crucially, patience. Let's dive into the economic quagmire Hannibal was wading through. The cost of keeping an army operational far from home was astronomical. We're talking about maintaining an army of over 30,000 men, each needing food, pay, and the occasional morale boost. Carthage, despite its wealth, was stretched thinner than a pair of cheap sandals. The silver mines of Iberia could only do so much, and Hannibal had to constantly improvise, relying on local support and the spoils of war. But even the most generous Italian town could only provide so much, especially when Hannibal's elephants had appetites that could rival a teenage football team. And then there was the political fallout. The Carthaginian Senate wasn't exactly sending care packages. Think of them as the passive-aggressive roommate who promises to help with rent, but is always conveniently short. They were divided over the war's cost, and whether supporting Hannibal's Italian campaign was even worth the effort. Meanwhile, Rome was rallying like a heavyweight champ, slowly building its forces, and devising a plan to isolate Hannibal from reinforcements and supplies. Speaking of Rome, let's not forget the political shenanigans on their end. The Romans weren't just sitting on their laurels, waiting for Hannibal to knock on the city gates. They were busy rethinking their strategy, shifting from the field to the boardroom. The Fabian strategy, named after Quintus Fabius Maximus, the cunctator, or delayer, was like a masterclass in patience. Instead of confronting Hannibal directly, the Romans focused on nibbling at the edges of his support, targeting supply lines and allies. It was the ancient equivalent of slowly turning off the Wi-Fi and waiting for your sibling to crack. This brings us to the pivotal moment in 203 BC, when Hannibal faced the stark reality that his Italian dream was crumbling like an overcooked biscardi. With no reinforcements from Carthage and the Roman noose tightening, he had no choice but to retreat. It was a strategic withdrawal, but let's be honest, it was a retreat nonetheless. Hannibal and his forces had to hightail it out of Italy, leaving behind a trail of battles won, but not the war. Hannibal's return to Carthage wasn't exactly a hero's welcome. The political climate was frosty, and the city he had left as a promising young general was now a cauldron of discontent and economic strain. Yet, Hannibal being Hannibal, he didn't just fade into obscurity. He took on a new role, reforming Carthage's economy and military as he prepared for the inevitable Roman retaliation. And that retaliation came in the form of Scipio Africanus, the Roman general who had learned well from Hannibal's tactics. In 202 BC, at the Battle of Zama, Hannibal faced a mirror image of his own strategic brilliance. Scipio had studied the Carthaginian maestro and pulled a few tricks straight from Hannibal's playbook, outmaneuvering him on the battlefield. Hannibal's troops, though battle-hardened, couldn't withstand the Roman juggernaut backed by well-coordinated cavalry and a disciplined infantry. The defeat at Zama sealed Carthage's fate, forcing them to sue for peace under harsh terms. Hannibal, who had once terrorized the Roman Republic, was now a man with an empire in ruins. Yet, his reputation as a military genius remained intact. He had taken Rome to the brink, leaving a legacy that would influence military strategists for centuries. So, what did we learn from all this? Hannibal's campaign taught us that audacity could carry you far, but logistics would determine how far you could actually stay. It highlighted the importance of adaptability in warfare. After all, the Romans turned the tide not with brute force, but with strategic patience and the ability to learn from their enemy. Hannibal's use of diverse troops and innovative tactics became the blueprint for future generals, from Napoleon to Patton. But let's not forget the human element. Hannibal's story is also a cautionary tale about ambition and the perils of overextending oneself. His legacy, while marked by brilliance, is also a reminder that even the greatest minds can falter when hubris overshadows practicality. He was a man who dared to dream big, and even though he didn't conquer Rome, his legend endures. In the annals of history, Hannibal stands as a testament to the power of determination, the art of war, and the complex dance between ambition and reality. His life was a symphony of triumphs and defeats, each note resonating through time. And as we close this chapter, let's tip our hats to the man who, despite all odds, dared to challenge the might of Rome with a handful of elephants and an unyielding spirit. Because in the end, history isn't just about the victors. It's about those who dared to fight the unwinnable battles, leaving a legacy that echoes through the ages. In medieval England, hunting wasn't just a pastime. It was practically an Olympic sport with its own rulebook thicker than a blacksmith's bicep. If you were imagining jolly peasants traipsing through Sherwood Forest with bows and arrows, think again. The reality was more like a medieval version of Game of Thrones, where the woods were arenas and the stakes were high. The forest laws, which were less about preserving nature and more about keeping the king's deer safe from the grubby hands of commoners, laid down a strict hierarchy of who could hunt and what they could hunt. And spoiler alert, if you weren't nobility, your hunting options were about as wide as a knight's visor. Let's start with the basics, the forest laws. These weren't your average no-littering signs. Instituted by William the Conqueror after 1066, they were more like a royal decree that turned vast swaths of land into exclusive hunting grounds for the crown. And by vast, I mean nearly a third of England became royal forests, covering about 90,000 acres at their peak. If you were caught poaching, it wasn't just a slap on the wrist. You could lose an actual hand or even your life. Talk about a tough crowd. Now, why such draconian measures? Well, hunting was the medieval equivalent of a status update. It was a way for the upper crust to showcase their power and wealth. The ability to hunt certain animals, like deer and boar, was not just a privilege, but a symbol of nobility. It was like the nobleman's version of owning a Ferrari, except, with antlers. But here's where it gets interesting. These laws didn't just affect the wildlife, they reshaped society. The forest laws essentially cordoned off huge areas of land, which meant peasants who lived in or near these forests found their livelihoods dramatically altered. No longer could they freely gather wood or graze their animals. It was like turning their backyard into a restricted VIP area, except they still had to live there. And speaking of myths, let's tip our feathered hats to Robin Hood. While the tales paint him as a charming outlaw robbing from the rich and giving to the poor, the harsh truth is that any commoner who hunted in these royal forests was indeed an outlaw, just minus the merry band and catchy theme song. The real-life Robin Hoods were more like desperate dudes trying not to starve. But hey, legends gotta have some pizzazz, right? The political ramifications of these laws were just as impactful. They were a tool for the monarchy to assert dominance over the nobility too. By controlling who could hunt, the king kept a tight leash on the power dynamics within his court. It was a not-so-subtle reminder of who was really in charge. Imagine telling your local duke he couldn't join the hunt. It was like saying he couldn't wear his favorite codpiece. These laws also led to some rather amusing historical records. Take, for example, the Carta de Foresta of 1217, which was basically the Magna Carta's less famous sibling. It aimed to soften the blow of the forest laws on common folk. It allowed for some rights to be restored to the people, like the ability to collect firewood and let their pigs forage for acorns. Yes, that's right, medieval legal battles often boiled down to acorns. Who knew? In summary, hunting in medieval England was an elaborate dance of power, privilege, and punishment. It wasn't just about who could shoot a rabbit. It was a microcosm of the societal structure. The forest laws weren't whimsical conservation efforts, but strict regulations that reinforced class divisions. They painted a vivid picture of a time when the sound of a hunting horn was both a call to adventure and a reminder of who called the shots. So next time you hear the legend of Robin Hood, remember, behind every myth, there's a history lesson waiting to be uncovered. So, if you thought medieval hunting was just a nobleman and his trusty bow, think again. The reality was much more like a well-orchestrated medieval flash mob, complete with an entourage that would give any celebrity a run for their money. Forget about solitary hunts. Noblemen rarely ventured into the woods alone. They were usually accompanied by a small army of retainers, beaters, and huntsmen, not to mention the pack of hounds which, let's be honest, were the real stars of the show. Let's dive into the gear, shall we? First up, the longbow. Now, this wasn't just any bow you'd pick up at ye old archery shop. The English longbow was a piece of engineering that could launch an arrow over 200 yards away. Made of yew wood, each bow took about 4-6 years to season and construct. And trust me, you didn't just hand one of these lethal beauties to any Tom, Dick, or Harry. Archers trained for years to master the draw weight, which could be as much as 100 pounds. This wasn't just a weapon. It was an investment in both time and sweat equity. And speaking of investments, just owning a longbow wasn't enough. You needed arrows, lots of them. The average hunting trip could see hundreds of arrows let loose, each one painstakingly crafted with a steel head and goose feather fletching. It's estimated that around 1,000 arrows could cost the equivalent of a skilled laborer's monthly wage. That's like shelling out for a month's rent just to play darts, but on a much larger, feathered scale. But wait, there's more. Enter the trained hounds, the medieval equivalent of a high-end GPS system. These dogs were bred specifically for hunting, with names like greyhounds, bloodhounds, and mastiffs. Training a hunting dog was no small feat. It could take years and cost a small fortune in feed and care. Each dog was a walking investment, with prices that could rival a small herd of cattle. And let's face it, the dogs did most of the heavy lifting, or sniffing, rather, tracking down the game in the dense thickets of England's forests. Now, let's talk economics, because every arrow and every hound had a price tag. Maintaining this hunting gear and the animals wasn't just an expense. It was an economic ecosystem. The blacksmiths who crafted arrowheads, the fletchers who assembled the arrows, the boweyers who built the bows. It was like a medieval stimulus package for craftsmen. And don't forget the kennel masters and dog trainers who ensured that the hounds were always ready to go. It was a full-time job and then some. So, where does this leave our noble hunter? Not only did he need the right equipment and a skilled retinue, but he also had to bankroll the whole operation. This wasn't a solo sport. It was a group effort that required coordination and, let's be honest, cold hard cash. The myth of the solitary noble hunter, about as accurate as a medieval map of the world. In reality, hunting parties were social events, a chance to rub shoulders with fellow nobility and show off your latest acquisitions, be they new dogs, a new bow, or, heaven forbid, the latest in hunting fashion. And let's not forget the spectacle. Imagine a nobleman setting out with his entourage, banners flying, horns blaring. It was a parade with a purpose. The hunt was not just about bagging game. It was about being seen, about making a statement. It was the medieval equivalent of a red carpet event, where who you were seen with mattered almost as much as what you caught. The more people you could bring along, the more impressive your display of wealth and power. In this sense, hunting was both a sport and a performance, a way to reinforce one's social standing. It was an opportunity to network, to forge alliances, and to assert dominance. Forget the solitary figure stalking silently through the woods. This was a spectacle, a grand display of camaraderie and competition. So, next time you picture a medieval hunt, imagine it with all the pomp and circumstance of a royal procession, because that's closer to the truth. And while the romantic tales of lone hunters persist, the reality was a carefully choreographed dance of power and prestige. The medieval hunt was as much about who you knew as what you knew, a social chess game played out under the canopy of England's sprawling forests. So, when you hear tales of noble hunters, remember, it was less about solitude and more about strategy, both on the hunting ground and within the social hierarchy. Hunting in medieval England was less about finding food and more about flexing social muscles. Picture this, a nobleman striding through the forest, not simply in pursuit of game, but in a grand theatrical display, complete with an entourage worthy of a medieval rock star. It was the equivalent of posting a meticulously curated Instagram story, except this was all about live-action status updates. The hunt was a stage where social dramas unfolded, a place where alliances were forged and rivalries simmered under the canopy of leaves. It was as much about the company you kept as the boar you bagged. In fact, if you were a medieval matchmaker, you'd probably spend more time in the forest than in a ballroom. The hunt was a prime opportunity for courtship. Young nobles, often with more titles than common sense, used hunting expeditions as a chance to woo potential suitors. Picture a young lord impressively drawing his bow, aiming not just at a stag, but at the heart of a lady watching from the sidelines. It's like a medieval Tinder. Swipe right if he hits the target. Now, let's talk diplomacy. In a world where travel was more arduous than explaining TikTok to your grandparents, hunting trips were a rare occasion where noble families gathered. Imagine it as a medieval summit, where instead of conference rooms, they met in the woods, and the only agenda was to see who could out-hunt whom. Monarchs used these gatherings as convenient settings for political discussions, all under the guise of leisure. It was a chance to negotiate alliances, settle disputes, or even hatch a plot or two. The hunt provided a setting where political maneuvering was as much a sport as the chase itself. Feasting, of course, was the grand finale of any successful hunt. Think of it as the medieval after-party, where the spoils of the hunt were celebrated with a banquet that would make your average Thanksgiving dinner look like a snack. The meat from a hunt wasn't just sustenance. It was a symbol of victory and plenty. A successful hunt meant tables groaning under the weight of venison, pheasant, and boar, turning a meal into a display of wealth and hospitality. The more extravagant the feast, the higher your standing climbed in the social pecking order. It was a culinary show of force, where the number of courses could rival the number of guests. Digging deeper into the cultural significance, hunting was a rite of passage. Young nobles were expected to master the art of the hunt as part of their education. It was a test of skill, bravery, and endurance. Successfully bringing down a stag was akin to graduating with honors. It was proof that you had the mettle to lead, to protect, and to provide. Hunting was a proving ground, a way to demonstrate that you were worthy of your title and ready to uphold the family's honor. It was a tradition steeped in expectations, where failure wasn't just embarrassing, it was a stain on the family name. But let's not forget the common folk, who were largely excluded from this grand spectacle. For them, hunting wasn't just about survival, it was a constant reminder of their place in society. Watching the nobility parade through the forest, flaunting their privilege, was a stark contrast to their own restricted lives. It was a bitter pill to swallow, knowing that the meat served at noble feasts came from the same forests that they were forbidden to enter. The romanticized image of the hunt as a noble pursuit hides the reality of a time when social mobility was as rare as a unicorn sighting. However, the legends of dashing hunters and daring deeds continue to captivate us, offering a glimpse into a world where hunting was more than a sport. It was a microcosm of medieval society, with all its complexities and contradictions. As we peel back the layers of the hunt, it becomes clear that each trip into the forest was a carefully orchestrated event, a tapestry woven with threads of power, ambition, and strategy. It was a world where the game was not just the quarry, but the very fabric of social interaction. Every arrow loosed, every horn sounded, was a note in the symphony of medieval life, where the echoes of the hunt resonated far beyond the forest's edge. So, while the myths may paint a picture of gallant lords and ladies in a pastoral paradise, the reality was a brutal and brilliant dance of politics and power, as thrilling and dangerous as the hunt itself. While the myths of medieval gallantry may have us picturing the hunt as a nobleman's playground, the reality was that these activities left deep scars on the English landscape and its inhabitants, both two-legged and four. So, grab your eco-friendly tote bags, and let's take a stroll through the medieval countryside to uncover the environmental impact of these royal escapades. First, let's get something straight. The term forest in medieval England didn't mean a dense woodland filled with chirping birds and scampering squirrels. Nope, the word forest was more of a legal term, a declaration that a certain area was reserved for royal hunting, whether it was covered in trees or not. Imagine telling your neighbor their backyard is now your private golf course. It was kind of like that, but with more deer and fewer birdies. These royal forests covered enormous swaths of land, around 90,000 acres at their peak, as mentioned. It was like turning a third of the country into the king's personal nature reserve. But let's not romanticize it. This wasn't early environmental conservation. It was more about controlling resources and flexing political muscle. The aim wasn't to protect the environment, but to safeguard the king's hunting privileges. If preserving wildlife was a side effect, well, that was purely coincidental. Now, the wildlife. Picture England's fauna as a medieval buffet, except the menu was dictated by the whims of the elite. Deer and boar were the prime cuts, reserved exclusively for the upper echelons. Meanwhile, commoners were left scrounging for the medieval equivalent of scraps, sometimes literally. The forest laws were so restrictive that killing the king's deer could earn you a trip to the gallows, or, if you were lucky, just the loss of a limb. Talk about a high-stakes dinner party. The ecological impact. Let's just say the wildlife wasn't exactly thriving under this royal regime. Hunting pressure, along with habitat modification, led to significant declines in certain animal populations. The medieval nobility's penchant for hunting wasn't just a weekend hobby. It was a full-time operation that dramatically shifted the balance of nature. By the late Middle Ages, species like the wild boar were on the brink of local extinction, hunted down to the last piglet in the name of sport and status. And let's not forget the knock-on effects. With certain predators and prey being hunted relentlessly, ecosystem's balance was thrown off kilter. You might call it an early example of human-induced climate change, albeit on a smaller scale. The removal of top predators like wolves and lynxes meant deer populations sometimes exploded, leading to overgrazing and ultimately landscape degradation. It was a classic case of oops, we didn't think this through, only with more fur and antlers. Now you might be thinking, didn't they realize what they were doing? Well, medieval world didn't exactly have Greta Thunberg to give them a pep talk on sustainability. The idea of environmental conservation was as foreign to them as Wi-Fi, but there were glimmers of awareness. The Carta de Forester of 1217, remember, the Magna Carta's lesser-known sibling, attempted to roll back some excesses, allowing common folk limited access to resources like wood and grazing land. It was a small step towards recognizing that, hey, maybe we shouldn't strangle the countryside in pursuit of a good hunt. Fast forward to today, and it's not hard to draw parallels between medieval hunting practices and our own modern-day environmental challenges. The relentless pursuit of resources, often at the expense of ecological balance, is a tale as old as time. Whether it's medieval nobles pursuing deer or modern industries pursuing profit, the result is often the same. A landscape left reeling from human ambition. Yet, there's a certain romantic appeal to the medieval hunt that persists, much like the allure of a vintage car that guzzles gas like there's no tomorrow. We're drawn to the pageantry, the drama, the very human desire to conquer nature. It's a narrative that's hard to resist, even if the reality was that those hunting horns heralded more than just a chase. It was a harbinger of ecological upheaval. In the end, the story of medieval hunting is a reminder of how our actions ripple through time, shaping landscapes and legacies. It's a history lesson etched in the very soil of England, a tale of power, privilege, and the perennial human dance with nature. So, when you next hear the legend of Robin Hood or imagine a knight galloping through a forest, remember the other side of the story. Behind those romanticized hunts is a landscape marked by human hands, a testament to our enduring impact on the natural world. And while this part of the story makes for fewer ballads, it's a crucial chapter in the saga of our shared history. And so, as we step out of those shadowy medieval forests and into the light of modern-day understanding, it's time to reflect on the myths and realities of medieval hunting. We've spent quite a journey debunking the romanticized image of the noble hunter. You know the one, our dashing hero galloping through the forest, keen eyes scanning for prey, heart pure and noble. But reality, dear listener, was a bit more, well, let's say gritty. The harsh truths of medieval hunting practices are like an unvarnished medieval manuscript, all ink blots and smudged lines. It wasn't just about the thrill of the chase or the glory of the catch. It was a complex web of power dynamics, legal entanglements, and ecological impact. It was less about valor and more about who could afford the most impressive entourage, who had the king's favor, and who could navigate the sticky web of forest laws without ending up on the wrong side of a noose. Fast forward a few centuries, and what echoes do we find in today's hunting and wildlife management practices? For starters, we've swapped out the medieval longbow for high-powered rifles and digital scopes, but the underlying themes aren't entirely different. Hunting remains a sport of privilege, often restricted by laws that determine who can hunt what, where, and when. Sure, you won't lose a limb for poaching in modern England, but you might face a hefty fine or jail time. The stakes are different, but the game remains much the same. And economically speaking, hunting still contributes to a complex financial ecosystem. Today, it's not the blacksmith and the fletcher, but the manufacturers of hunting gear, the tourism operators, and the conservationists who are part of this intricate dance. Hunting licenses and fees often fund wildlife management programs, creating a somewhat ironic cycle where the hunt fuels the protection of the very wildlife it seeks to manage. It's a delicate balance, much like trying to juggle flaming torches while riding a unicycle. One wrong move, and things get messy fast. Socially, hunting still serves as a stage for status. Those who can afford the luxury of big game hunting safaris or exclusive hunting club memberships often use these experiences as a display of wealth and power. It's the Instagram story of the modern era. Back in medieval times, a successful hunt was celebrated with a feast. Today, it might be a post of a triumphant hunter posing with their catch, hashtags and all. The medium has changed, but the message remains. Look at what I've achieved. Look at what I can do. But let's not sell our medieval ancestors entirely short. Despite their often brutal methods, there were moments of proto-conservation. The forest laws, while draconian, did inadvertently protect certain wildlife populations by restricting who could hunt them. It was an accidental step towards conservation, as much as a medieval attempt at controlling resources and status. Today, we recognize the importance of protecting wildlife and their habitats, and we're hopefully more intentional about it. The legend and the reality of medieval hunting also remind us of a fundamental truth about human nature, our need to conquer, to control, and to leave a mark. Whether it's a hunter in medieval England or a modern-day conservationist, both are driven by a desire to manage and mold the natural world. It's a testament to our dual nature, capable of great destruction and preservation, often in the same breath. As we wrap up this historical excursion, let's leave with a few sharp observations. First, history isn't just a series of events. It's a mirror reflecting our own complexities back at us. The myths of the noble hunter and the gritty reality of medieval hunting practices are two sides of the same coin, each offering lessons if we're willing to look beyond the surface. Second, the dance between humanity and nature is as old as time itself. Our medieval ancestors might have lacked the vocabulary of modern conservation, but their actions set the stage for the environmental challenges we face today. Understanding their world helps us navigate our own, offering insights into how we might better balance our desires with the needs of the natural world. Finally, in the grand tapestry of history, every thread, no matter how small or inconsequential it might seem, contributes to the larger picture. The story of medieval hunting is a reminder that behind every legend lies a complex reality, rich with lessons and warnings. So, next time you hear a tale of gallant knights and noble hunts, remember the gritty truths that lurk beneath the romantic veneer. It's in those truths that we find the most meaningful connections to our past, and perhaps a road map to a more balanced future. Deep in the cradle of civilization, where the Tigris and Euphrates rivers awkwardly converged like two kids who couldn't quite figure out a handshake, a man named Sargon would rise to power. And by rise, I mean he wasn't exactly born with a silver spoon in his mouth, more like a clay spoon, if anything. Around 2334 BCE, Mesopotamia was a messy quilt of city-states, each with its own king, god, and probably a surplus of clay tablets filled with complaints about irrigation. Enter Sargon of Akkad, a guy who wasn't content with just managing a local plot of land. No, he had a vision of an empire, the first of its kind, no less. Now, the legend of Sargon paints him as a sort of ancient Moses. Supposedly, he was found floating down a river in a basket. But let's not get carried away with the romanticism of biblical proportions. What we do know is that Sargon started off as a cupbearer to the king of Kish. Yes, a cupbearer. It sounds as glamorous as it sounds. A job that was equal parts sommelier and bodyguard, with a dash of therapist for those late-night royal rants. But don't underestimate the power of proximity to power. Sargon understood this well. The political landscape back then was as patchy as a poorly connected Wi-Fi signal. City-states like Kish, Uruk, and were constantly squabbling over resources, land, and whose guard was more impressive. If you've ever tried organizing a group project where everyone thinks they're the leader, you'll get the general vibe. Sargon, however, was not one to sit on the sidelines while everyone else was busy playing their own little games of thrones. His first step to greatness, the conquest of Kish. Instead of being content with the ceremonial pouring of wine, Sargon decided to pour himself a bigger serving of power. He overthrew the king, which in those days was the equivalent of getting voted off the island, permanently. With Kish under his belt, Sargon then set his eyes on the rest of Mesopotamia. It was like a classic game of Risk, only with more cuneiform and fewer dice. The challenge of ruling an empire when your main mode of communication was a clay tablet is not to be underestimated. Imagine trying to issue a decree, only to realize it takes a week to carve into stone, and by then, the whole message is out of date. Yet, Sargon managed to keep things remarkably efficient. He centralized administration and established the city of Akkad as his capital. The exact location of Akkad remains a bit of a mystery to modern archaeologists, but that's what happens when your city planning is more aspirational than practical. To maintain control, Sargon appointed loyal officials, set up a network of governors, and ensured a steady flow of tribute from the conquered territories. His empire stretched as far north as the Mediterranean Sea and as far south as the Persian Gulf, covering roughly 300,000 square kilometers. That's like ruling a chunk of Europe, all while dealing with the logistics of ancient postal services. And let's not forget the army. Sargon reportedly had a standing army of 400 men, which, in a world where most people were busy farming and not soldiering, was a serious flex. But Sargon's rule wasn't just about brute force. He knew that to hold an empire together, you needed more than just military might. He promoted trade, linking Mesopotamia with regions as far as the Indus Valley and the Anatolian highlands. This wasn't just a matter of bringing in exotic goods, though who doesn't like a bit of lapis lazuli to brighten up the palace? It was about creating a web of economic interdependence. The more entwined the economies, the harder it was for any single region to break away. Of course, the romantic narrative frames Sargon as a benevolent unifier, but let's not gloss over the less than savory details. His campaigns were brutal, and his methods could be harsh. The Akkadian Empire didn't arise solely because of diplomatic dinners and heartfelt conversations. Sargon's legacy is a blend of military genius, ruthless ambition, and political savvy. He laid the groundwork for what it meant to be an emperor long before it was cool. As we look back on Sargon's rise, it's clear he was more than just a figurehead. He was a force of nature. And while he didn't have to worry about Twitter backlash or 24-hour news cycles, ruling an empire in 2334 BCE came with its own unique set of challenges. Yet, against the odds, Sargon of Akkad carved his name into history, not just on clay tablets, but into the very fabric of what it means to wield power. Now, pivoting from Sargon's impressive rise to the nuts and bolts of how he kept the wheels of his empire turning, let's delve into his military wizardry. Picture this. It's around 2300 BCE, and Sargon is not just sitting on his laurels, basking in the glory of his new empire. Nope, our man was out in the trenches, crafting military tactics that would make even Sun Tzu nod in approval. Sargon's campaigns were legendary, but they weren't just about brute strength. Imagine trying to conquer a patchwork of city-states, each with its own fortified walls, and no GPS to guide your troops. The king of Akkad knew that a successful campaign wasn't just about having more swords than the other guy. It was about brain over brawn, strategy over sheer numbers. His army was a lean, mean fighting machine, and at its core was an innovation that set them apart, the composite bow. This wasn't your average wooden stick with a string. No, sir, this was a sophisticated piece of warfare tech, combining wood, horn, and sinew to create a weapon that could outshoot any simple wooden bow. The result? Akkadian archers could rain arrows down on their enemies from a distance that left opposing armies scrambling for cover. Sargon's forces didn't just rely on advanced weaponry. They were organized, disciplined, and dare we say, a little bit sneaky. He employed the classic divide-and-conquer strategy with a twist. Instead of spreading his forces thin across the empire, Sargon would focus his military might on one city-state at a time, overwhelming them with sheer force and tactical brilliance. It's like playing chess with a sledgehammer, precise and devastating. After securing one city-state, he'd consolidate his gains, making sure his rear was covered before moving on to the next target. This meticulous approach allowed him to systematically expand his territory without leaving his empire vulnerable to counterattacks. Now, let's not forget the logistics of ancient warfare. Imagine managing an army of 400 men, all of whom need to eat, sleep, and occasionally complain about their sandals. There were no food trucks or supply chains like we have today, so how did Sargon keep his army fed and watered? 2 words: local resources. Sargon's strategy was to live off the land, using the resources of the conquered territories to sustain his troops. It was a practice that would later be mirrored by generals throughout history, from Alexander the Great to Napoleon. By commandeering local grain stores and livestock, Sargon ensured that his soldiers were well fed and ready to fight, while also denying those resources to his enemies. But logistical genius didn't stop at just feeding his troops. Sargon understood the importance of infrastructure long before it became a buzzword in political campaigns. He made sure that roads and communication lines were established and maintained, allowing for the swift movement of his armies and messages across the vast Akkadian Empire. These roads, primitive by modern standards, were the lifelines of the empire, ensuring that Sargon's will could be enacted from the Mediterranean to the Persian Gulf. Of course, it's not all sunshine and roses when you're building an empire. The reality of Sargon's conquests was brutal. His campaigns left many city-states in ruins, their populations either subjugated or displaced. The romantic image of Sargon as a unifier glosses over the very real destruction that accompanied his rise to power. While he expanded trade routes and brought prosperity to some, others saw their cultures and autonomy crushed under the Akkadian boot. Sargon's ability to maintain control over such a vast territory also involved a hefty dose of political savvy. He didn't just rely on military might to keep his empire together. No, he was playing a game of political chess while everyone else was still figuring out checkers. Sargon installed governors loyal to him in key cities and established a network of vassal kings who, though technically autonomous, owed their allegiance and tribute to the Akkadian ruler. This system of indirect rule allowed Sargon to extend his reach without spreading his resources too thin. It was a balancing act of power and influence, one that required constant vigilance and a reputation for swift retribution against those who stepped out of line. Now, while Sargon was out there conquering the world, it wasn't all just about swords and soldiers. He understood the importance of propaganda. That's right, even back then, image was everything. Sargon had his deeds immortalized on steels, stone monuments that proclaimed his greatness and divine favor. Think of them as the ancient equivalent of a social media campaign. These steels were not just for show. They served a very real purpose in legitimizing his rule and keeping the population in check. When you're a ruler claiming to be chosen by the gods, it helps if you have a few stone testimonials to back you up. In the end, Sargon's legacy is a tapestry of innovation, strategy, and ruthlessness. He carved out the blueprint for empire building, showing that military conquest, logistical prowess, and political acumen could create a domain that stretched across the known world. But like any great empire, the seeds of its eventual decline were sown in its rapid expansion and the inevitable strains of managing such a sprawling territory. Sargon's story is a reminder that while the allure of power is intoxicating, the reality of wielding it is far more complex. And as we prepare to explore further into the intricacies of the Akkadian Empire, we'll uncover more about how Sargon's successors handled the monumental task of maintaining what he so ambitiously built. Just as Sargon's military prowess laid the foundation for his empire, his economic and administrative innovations cemented its stability. While conquests painted the map Akkadian blue, it was the less glamorous work of governance that kept the whole sprawling enterprise from unraveling like a poorly knitted sweater. In the grand tapestry of history, Sargon was not just a conqueror, but also a pioneering bureaucrat, though you'd never catch him wearing a suit and tie. Central to Sargon's strategy was the creation of a standardized system of weights and measures. If you think metric versus imperial is confusing today, imagine every city-state having its own quirky system, like measuring grain by the handful or trading sheep in units of that feels about right. Sargon, ever the practical visionary, introduced uniformity. He didn't just do it for the sake of consistency. This was about control. A standardized system meant easier taxation and smoother trade, making it just a bit harder for local governors to skim a little extra off the top. Speaking of taxation, if you've ever grumbled about tax season, spare a thought for the ancient Mesopotamians. Instead of W-2s and 1099, they had clay tablets and messengers who probably resembled ancient postal workers, minus the uniforms. Sargon's tax collectors were the unsung heroes, or villains, depending on your perspective. who ensured the empire's coffers were never empty. They collected tributes in the form of grain, livestock, and the occasional luxury item, like that trendy lapis lazuli. And if you thought taxes were a pain now, imagine paying your dues in bushels of barley. Your accountant would need a forklift. But this wasn't just about squeezing every last shekel from the populace. The revenue funded the empire's infrastructure and its famously formidable standing army. It kept the roads, those vital arteries of Sargon's empire, paved and patrolled. The tax system was a bit like an ancient Kickstarter campaign. Everyone chipped in, and in return, they got relative peace and protection, and perhaps a tote bag if they were lucky. Now, let's talk bureaucracy. If you've ever found yourself drowning in paperwork, spare a thought for Sargon's administrators. They didn't have the luxury of spreadsheets or email chains. Instead, they had an army of scribes and more clay tablets than a pottery class on steroids. Yet, it was this clay-based admin that held the empire together. Sargon established a central bureaucracy in Akkad, with officials overseeing everything from agriculture to military logistics. It was like a giant game of telephone, only the message was carved in stone, so you couldn't hang up on it. This centralized administration wasn't just about keeping tabs. It was about maintaining a delicate balance of power. Governors and officials were appointed based on loyalty and competence, not unlike the casting of a reality TV show. The result? An empire that could function even when Sargon wasn't around to micromanage. It was a system that demanded efficiency and accountability, two words you wouldn't normally associate with ancient governance. But the real genius of Sargon's administration was its adaptability. By keeping a tight rein on the provinces while allowing some local autonomy, Sargon created a system that could absorb different cultures without losing its identity. Think of it as the ultimate cultural buffet. Everyone got to keep their favorite dish, but they all had to agree on a shared menu. This cultural flexibility was crucial for an empire that spanned such diverse regions. Of course, all this organization and standardization didn't come without its challenges. Sargon's empire was a bit like a Jenga tower, impressive and precarious, with each new conquest adding another block to the stack. The real trick was ensuring it didn't come crashing down. It's a testament to Sargon's administrative acumen that his empire held together as long as it did, despite the logistical nightmares and occasional revolts. Yet, for all the innovations and standardizations, Sargon's legacy wasn't just about creating systems. It was about creating a narrative. Through steels and inscriptions, he crafted a story of divine favor and destined rule. These weren't just ancient bragging rights. They were propaganda tools, reinforcing his legitimacy and divine mandate. In a world where gods were as real as the crops you harvested, having divine backing was like having a cosmic stamp of approval. In the end, Sargon's economic and administrative achievements were as critical to his empire's success as his military conquests. He wasn't just a warrior king. He was an architect of systems, a builder of nations. His legacy was a blueprint that would echo through the ages, influencing empires from the Babylonians to the Romans. It's a reminder that while swords might win battles, it's the spreadsheets that keep the empire running. As we look forward to unearthing more about the Akkadian Empire's cultural and social dynamics, remember this. Sargon's legacy was not just carved in stone, but woven into the fabric of history. His story is a testament to the power of vision, organization, and yes, a little bit of ruthless ambition. So, next time you grumble about taxes or bureaucracy, just be glad you're not paying in barley. So, as we move from the nuts and bolts of Sargon's empire, taxes, roads, and all that logistical jazz, let's plunge into the cultural and technological whirlpool that was the Akkadian Empire at its zenith. Because yes, while Sargon was out there playing Risk on a grand scale, his empire was not just a military juggernaut. It was a beacon of creativity and innovation. Think of it like the Silicon Valley of its time, minus the electric scooters and artisanal coffee. First up, let's chat about the Akkadian language. This wasn't just some regional dialect used to scribble grocery lists on clay. Oh no, it became a lingua franca, like English today, but with more cuneiform and fewer spelling bees. By the time Sargon was done weaving his empire, Akkadian wasn't just spoken in Mesopotamia. It was the Goda language for diplomacy, and trade across the ancient Near East. Imagine trying to negotiate a peace treaty when your native tongues are as compatible as oil and water. Akkadian was the ancient Rosetta Stone, smoothing over those awkward conversations between city-states. Now, the rise of Akkadian wasn't just a happy accident. It was part of Sargon's grand design. By spreading the language, he spread his influence, an ancient version of cultural imperialism. It's a bit like Coca-Cola and McDonald's today. Get people hooked on your brand, and suddenly, you're everywhere. This linguistic dominance helped knit together the sprawling tapestry of his empire, creating a shared identity that was as much about words as it was about swords. But don't just take my word for it. The evidence is literally set in stone. Thousands of Akkadian tablets have been discovered, detailing everything from poetry to receipts. Yes, even ancient empires had paperwork. This brings us to another cultural feather in Akkad's cap, literature. The Akkadians weren't just about conquest and administration. They had a flair for storytelling that was as deep as the Euphrates in flood season. Consider the Epic of Gilgamesh, one of the oldest known works of literature. While it technically predates Sargon, it was during the Akkadian Empire that this epic tale was translated into Akkadian, ensuring its place in the cultural canon. It's a story of friendship, adventure, and existential musings about mortality. Sounds like a Netflix original, right? The Akkadians were masters at taking existing stories and giving them a new twist, much like Hollywood does with classic fairy tales. They were cultural curators, preserving and promoting stories that would resonate through the ages. Speaking of art, the Akkadian Empire wasn't just about literary achievements. Their artistic contributions laid the groundwork for styles and techniques that would influence generations. Take the head of an Akkadian ruler, often attributed to Sargon himself. Though let's be real, it could have been any bearded guy with a crown. This bronze sculpture showcases exceptional craftsmanship and a keen eye for realism. It's a far cry from the stick figures of earlier periods, depicting an idealized yet individualistic portrayal of power. Yet, here's the kicker. For all the art and culture, the so-called golden age of Akkad wasn't as shiny as it seems. Sure, they had stunning sculptures and epic tales, but life wasn't exactly a paradise. It was propaganda that painted Akkad in golden hues, much like those Instagram filters that make your vacation photos look better than the reality of sunburn and overpriced cocktails. Sargon's successors were savvy enough to spin tales of prosperity and divine favor, using art and literature as tools of propaganda. The empire was portrayed as the pinnacle of civilization, a narrative that conveniently glossed over the hardships faced by its citizens. Famine, rebellion, and the constant threat of invasion were very real, yet these stories were buried beneath layers of carefully crafted mythos. It's like the difference between a company's polished annual report and the reality of late-night pizza-fueled crunch sessions. By now, you might be wondering, how did this cultural dynamo manage to keep churning out masterpieces while dealing with the everyday chaos of empire? Well, that's where technology comes in. The Akkadians were no Luddites. They embraced technological advancements with open arms. They revolutionized agriculture with the introduction of the seed plow, transforming the Fertile Crescent into what was, quite literally, a breadbasket. This wasn't just about feeding the masses. It was about sustaining an empire that could support artists, scribes, and artisans, not just farmers and soldiers. Their innovations didn't stop at agriculture. The Akkadians were early adopters of metallurgy, refining techniques that would be passed down to subsequent civilizations. Their use of bronze wasn't just for show. It was practical and transformative. From weapons to tools, bronze was the silicon of its day, driving technological progress and economic growth. Of course, not every innovation was a stroke of genius. Some were more akin to those, as seen on TV gadgets that seem like a good idea until you try using them. But even when they stumbled, the Akkadians were continually pushing the envelope, experimenting with new ideas and technologies. This spirit of innovation was part of what made their empire so dynamic, a place where new ideas could flourish alongside traditional practices. As we delve deeper into the cultural and technological advancements of the Akkadian Empire, remember that this wasn't a monolithic golden age. It was a complex period of history, filled with contradictions and challenges. While Sargon and his successors crafted a narrative of divine favor and cultural supremacy, the reality was far more nuanced. The Akkadian Empire was a mosaic of achievements and struggles, a testament to human ingenuity and ambition. So, as we wrap up this section and prepare to explore the final chapters of the Akkadian saga, keep an eye open for the myths and realities that define this ancient civilization. Because, much like life today, the Akkadian Empire was a mix of triumphs and tribulations, where the line between legend and reality was often as blurred as an ancient clay tablet after a flood. As we march onward to the grand finale of the Akkadian Empire's saga, it's time to bid farewell to the rose-tinted spectacles and face the cold, hard truths of history. Because, spoiler alert, empires don't just gracefully bow out. They tend to stumble, crash, and burn in a not-so-glorious fashion. And the Akkadians, despite their impressive run, were no exception. So, what went wrong? Well, let's start with the internal strife, a classic case of too many cooks spoiling the broth. After Sargon's death, his empire was like a reality TV show where everyone thinks they're the star. His successors, including his son Rimush and grandson Naram-Sin, inherited not just the crown, but also a hefty load of trouble. Rimush faced rebellion after rebellion, as if the city-states were auditioning for a coup d'etat talent show. These uprisings were more than just local squabbles. They were symptomatic of deeper dissatisfaction. You see, the once unifying force of Akkad was beginning to fray at the edges like an old pair of jeans. Naram-Sin, on the other hand, took a different approach. He declared himself a god, which is a bold move in any century. It's like taking fake it till you make it to divine levels. This divinity claim might have boosted his ego, but it didn't do much for stability. Some regions were less than thrilled about worshipping their overlord, leading to further unrest. Internal discord was growing, and it was clear that the glue holding the empire together was more Elmer's than epoxy. Externally, things weren't any rosier. The Gutians, a group of mountain-dwelling folks who were not exactly besties with the Akkadians, saw their chance to strike. Picture them as the ultimate gate crashers at the Akkadian party. Around 2193 BCE, they stormed in, disrupting the party by toppling the empire's control. The Gutians weren't just a passing fad either. They stuck around long enough to make their presence felt, kind of like a bad cold that just won't quit. But wait, there's more. Mother Nature decided to throw her hat into the ring as well. Recent climate studies suggest a severe drought hit the region around this time. It was like the gods had turned off the tap, and no amount of rain dances could bring it back. This drought wasn't just a minor inconvenience, it was a full-blown crisis. Agriculture, the empire's lifeblood, took a nosedive. Imagine being a farmer and watching your crops wither faster than your patience at the DMV. This environmental blow was the nail in the coffin for an already struggling empire. With internal chaos, external threats, and Mother Nature's wrath, the Akkadian Empire was stretched thinner than a hipster's latte budget. The once mighty machine of governance and military might began to sputter. It's a classic case of what goes up must come down, and the Akkadians were coming down like a sack of bricks. Yet, in this grand tale of decline, there's a silver lining, because history isn't just about the falls, it's about the echoes they leave behind. The Akkadian Empire, despite its crash, left a legacy that would resonate through time. Their innovations in administration and governance were like a blueprint for future empires. They showed the world that you could knit together diverse cultures under a single banner, at least temporarily. The concept of a centralized bureaucracy and a standing army, that's Sargon's brainchild, echoed in the Roman legions and beyond. Culturally, the Akkadians handed down a rich tapestry of stories, language, and art. Akkadian cuneiform became the scholarly lingua franca of the ancient Near East, a testament to their enduring influence. The epic of Gilgamesh, with its tales of friendship and heroism, would continue to inspire long after the last brick of Akkad crumbled. The Akkadians might have fallen, but their cultural and linguistic contributions were immortal. In the grand scheme of things, the Akkadian Empire's legacy is a reminder that power is as fleeting as a desert mirage. It's a story of ambition and hubris, of dreams woven into reality, and then unraveled by forces both within and beyond control. The Akkadians taught us about the complexities of empire building, the fine line between unity and discord. So, as we draw the curtains on this chapter of history, let's remember the Akkadians not just for their conquests or their grandeur, but for their humanity, their struggles, their innovations, and their indelible mark on the tapestry of civilization. Because in the end, history isn't just about dates and events. It's about the people who dared to dream big, even when the odds were stacked against them. In the grand theater of history, the Scythians were the wild cards, those enigmatic horse-riding nomads who galloped across the Eurasian steppes like they were auditioning for an ancient action epic. Picture this. It's the 9th century BCE, and a group of people is redefining the concept of mobility, shrugging off sedentary lifestyles, and embracing the open road. Or rather, the endless expanse of grasslands that stretched from the Danube all the way to the Altai mountains. These folks were the Scythians, and if you think that sounds like a primeval version of a biker gang, you're not entirely wrong. Originating somewhere around the Black Sea region, these proto-cowboys didn't just ride horses, they were practically born in the saddle. Their mastery of horseback archery was the stuff of legends, earning them both fear and respect from their neighbors. These were the kind of people who could shoot an arrow while riding full tilt, which is essentially the ancient equivalent of texting while driving, except with much more lethal consequences. But let's not get ahead of ourselves. Before the Scythians were sending shivers down the spines of the ancient world with their military prowess, they were busy building the foundations of their economy, which, like any good business model, relied heavily on trade. And trade, for the Scythians, was a necessity as vital as their horses. You see, the landscape they roamed was as unforgiving as a tax audit. The climate was harsh, with winters that could freeze your enthusiasm and summers that could parch your optimism. This wasn't exactly the Garden of Eden, and it certainly didn't offer the kind of resources needed to sustain a settled agricultural lifestyle. So, what did the Scythians do? They got creative. They leveraged their location at the crossroads of Europe and Asia, turning their geographic disadvantage into an opportunity. They became middlemen in the great exchange of goods that flowed along what would later be known as the Silk Road. We're talking about a trade network that spanned thousands of miles, connecting the wealth of the Orient with the markets of the Mediterranean. The Scythians were the FedEx of the ancient world, only with more tattoos and fewer uniforms. Their initial trading ventures were as humble as they were essential. They swapped the pelts and furs of the steppe. Think of them as the original fashionistas of the fur trade, for the luxuries they couldn't produce themselves. In return, they got metals, textiles, and crucially, horses from the east, which were as valuable as gold to these nomadic warriors. Horses were their lifeblood, their currency, and their status symbols all rolled into one. Imagine a world where horsepower wasn't just a metaphor, but an actual measure of wealth and power. But why did any of this matter? Well, in a world where sedentary societies were the norm, the Scythians represented a radically different way of life. They challenged the idea that civilization was synonymous with city walls and cultivated fields. Instead, they showed that mobility, adaptability, and a keen eye for trade could create a thriving culture. Their prowess in trade and warfare turned them into a significant power player in the ancient world, capable of influencing the politics and economies of their more settled neighbors. Now, let's talk about their geographic challenges a bit more. The Eurasian steppes weren't just vast. They were like the ancient version of a blank canvas, offering little in the way of natural barriers or resources. This wide-open space was both a blessing and a curse. On one hand, it allowed the Scythians to move freely and quickly, perfect for their hit-and-run style of warfare. On the other hand, it meant they had to rely on trade to acquire the goods they couldn't produce themselves, such as grains, wine, and olive oil, which were the staples of the more settled societies to the south. This dependency on trade made the Scythians early adopters of what we might call globalization. They were at the heart of an intricate web of exchanges that not only brought them material wealth, but also cultural influences that enriched their society. It's a bit like imagining the Scythians as the original hipsters, mixing and matching influences from different cultures long before it became cool. But let's not romanticize them too much. The Scythians were also known for their brutality. Herodotus, the Greek historian, has a few choice words about their rather gruesome customs, like using the skulls of their enemies as drinking cups. Charming, right? Yet, this fearsome reputation was part of their brand, so to speak. It kept potential invaders at bay and secured their place as dominant players in the steppe. As we wrap up this introduction, let's bust a few myths. While it's tempting to imagine the Scythians as wild, untamed horsemen living in harmony with nature, the reality was a bit more complex. They were savvy traders, cunning warriors, and shrewd political operators who understood the value of alliances and the power of intimidation. They were as much strategists as they were warriors, and their legacy in shaping the ancient world is as enduring as the tales of their exploits. So, as we delve deeper into their story, remember that the Scythians were more than just the sum of their parts. They were a force of nature, riding the waves of history with a swagger that still echoes through the ages. So, what did these Scythians really have up their leather sleeves that made them indispensable to the ancient world? It wasn't just about riding horses like the wind. They were the original masters of the trade game. Picture them as ancient Amazon Prime, delivering goods faster than you could say Silk Road, minus the 2-day shipping and customer reviews. But let's break it down to brass tacks, or gold as it were, because the Scythians weren't just peddling in pelts and fur. They had a veritable treasure trove of goods to offer, and they knew how to make a deal stick. Let's start with gold. Gold, the glittering metal that has launched 1,000 expeditions and ruined as many lives. The Scythians weren't just sitting on a pile of it like some mythical dragon. They were trading it with finesse. Archaeological finds have unearthed intricate gold jewelry and artifacts that make you wonder if they had a side gig as bling designers. They trade this gold with Greek merchants who were practically drooling over it, exchanging it for ceramics, olive oil, and wine. Imagine the Greeks, lounging in their togas, sipping Scythian bartered wine as they extolled the virtues of democracy. How many amphorae of olive oil did a Scythian horse fetch? While exact prices are harder to pin down than a Scythian nomad, it's clear that a single horse could be worth its weight in olive oil. This was more than just a barter. It was an exchange of cultures and lifestyles. Speaking of horses, they were the Scythians' calling card. Not just any horses, mind you, but steeds that could outrun the wind and outlast the toughest journeys. These weren't your average pony rides. They were the Ferraris of the steppe. The Persian Empire, with its sprawling territories and insatiable demand for cavalry horses, was a frequent customer. A well-bred Scythian horse could fetch a price equivalent to several months' wages for a Persian soldier, which made these trades lucrative indeed. This wasn't just commerce. It was a diplomatic dance, where the Scythians and Persians exchanged more than goods. They exchanged power dynamics. The Scythians also had a way with grain, a staple that was as vital as water to the settled civilizations. This wasn't your supermarket variety wheat. We're talking about grains that were the backbone of bread and the lifeblood of armies. The Greeks and Persians were more than willing to part with their crafted goods for the Scythians' agricultural bounty. It's said that the Scythians traded grain for wine with the Greeks, a classic case of, I'll give you carbs for your booze. And let's not forget the Greeks' fondness for Scythian wheat, which often ended up in the bustling markets of Athens, feeding the city-state's ever-expanding population. The trade routes themselves were no small feat. Spanning from the Black Sea to the edges of Persia, these paths were the veins through which the lifeblood of the Scythian economy flowed. Imagine caravans of horses and carts laden with goods, traversing hundreds of miles over steppes and mountains. This was no easy commute. It was a grueling journey filled with the kind of challenges that made modern logistics look like a cakewalk. These routes were the precursors to the more famous Silk Road, acting as the connective tissue between East and West long before Marco Polo made his legendary trek. Now, let's not gloss over the diplomatic misunderstandings that came with these exchanges. The Scythians, with their penchant for the dramatic, often found themselves in awkward situations that make modern political gaffes look tame. There are tales of Scythian envoys arriving in Greek cities with gifts that were culturally inappropriate, or sending envoys to Persian courts with messages that lost something in translation. Imagine a Scythian emissary trying to explain the concept of a horseblood feast to a Persian courtier who preferred his dinners less, shall we say, sanguine. These exchanges were more than mere transactions. They were cultural collisions that sometimes ended in alliances, and other times in outright war. In the grand scheme of things, the Scythian trade network was a linchpin in the economy of the ancient world. They weren't just trading goods, they were trading influence, status, and ideas. Through their exchanges, they disseminated art, technology, and even religious beliefs across continents. This wasn't just about making a quick buck. It was about weaving the fabric of a connected world. And let's not forget the myths that these interactions inspired. The Greeks, for instance, were known for spinning tales of the fierce, gold-hoarding Scythians, tales that were as much fantasy as reality, but captured the imagination of an entire civilization. But let's not kid ourselves. This wasn't all sunshine and roses. The Scythians' trade prowess came with a hefty dose of brutality. Their reputation for savagery wasn't just a PR stunt. It was a protective measure in a world where might often made right. It was a time when the line between trader and raider was as thin as a Scythian arrow. They might trade peacefully with you today, but come tomorrow, if the price was right, or the conditions dire, they could just as easily be raiding your village. This dual nature made them both feared and respected, a combination that ensured their place in the annals of history. As we stand at the edge of this tale, ready to plunge deeper into the world of the Scythians, let's remember that these ancient nomads were more than just the sum of their trades. They were the bridge between worlds, the messengers of cultures, and the harbingers of change. Their legacy isn't just buried in the sands of time. It's etched into the very foundations of the civilizations they touched. So, as the Scythians ride off into the next chapter of their story, remember that they weren't just trading goods, they were trading destinies. And in the grand theater of history, that's no small feat. As the Scythians galloped off into the annals of history, they left more than just hoofprints. They left a cultural legacy that stretched as far as their trade networks. These nomadic trendsetters weren't just conduits of goods. They were the original influencers, long before social media made that a thing. Just as they exchanged gold for olive oil, the Scythians traded ideas, styles, and a certain je ne sais quoi that left a mark on the civilizations they touched. Picture a world where a Scythian warrior's stylish ensemble was as coveted as their commodities. Start with their fashion sense, a blend of practicality and pizzazz that would make any runway designer weep. Their clothing was designed for the harsh realities of steppe life, but with a flair that caught the eye of their neighbors. Think fitted leather trousers, embroidered tunics, and those iconic pointed hats, which were as much a fashion statement as they were functional headgear against the elements. These weren't just garments. They were the couture of the ancient steppes, the kind of attire that made Greek philosophers ponder the nature of beauty while they sipped their wine. The Greeks, for instance, were so taken with Scythian style that they incorporated elements into their own wardrobes. The Scythians' love for bold patterns and vibrant colors found its way into Greek textiles, making their way into the fashion scene of Athens like the latest Parisian trend. Even more intriguing was the Scythian penchant for tattoos. These weren't your average sailor ink. They were intricate designs that told stories and signified status, a practice that fascinated Herodotus enough to mention it in his writings. Imagine a society where your skin was a canvas, each tattoo a chapter of your life story. While today you might see a tribal sleeve on a skateboarder, back then, these tattoos were the mark of a warrior, a way to wear your history quite literally on your sleeve. But let's not forget the influence of Scythian warfare techniques. Their mastery of mounted combat and archery wasn't just impressive, it was revolutionary. The Greeks and Persians, both formidable in their own right, found themselves taking notes. Scythian tactics seeped into their military playbooks, altering the way battles were fought. The Scythians' hit-and-run style, using mobility and surprise to outmaneuver heavier, more cumbersome armies, was like a lesson in military efficiency. They were the ancient equivalent of guerrilla fighters, teaching the world that agility could trump brute strength. The Scythians even had a hand, or perhaps a hoof, in shaping the mythos of the great horse cultures. Their knowledge of breeding and training horses was second to none, and their cavalry became the stuff of legend. The famed Persian cavalry was influenced heavily by Scythian practices, as were the horse-reliant armies of the Greeks. This wasn't just about horses. It was about transforming the battlefield, about showing that a well-trained mount could be as decisive as a well-sharpened sword. Yet, despite all this cross-cultural pollination, let's not romanticize them into oblivion. The Scythians weren't just gentle ambassadors of fashion and warfare. They were also fierce, and at times, downright savage. Their interactions with neighbors often swung between trade and conflict, like a pendulum with a mind of its own. While they might have inspired the latest trends in Athens, they were also the specter that haunted the dreams of Greek strategists. Their reputation for brutality wasn't just hearsay. It was a reality that kept potential adversaries on edge. So, why did their style and strategies resonate so deeply with others? Well, it's the allure of the exotic, the appeal of the other. The Greeks and Persians were drawn to the Scythians' mystique, their ability to thrive in a world that seemed inhospitable. This admiration was a double-edged sword, fostering both envy and fear. The Scythians represented a way of life untethered from the constraints of city walls and fixed borders, a freedom that other cultures could only dream of. And speaking of dreams, let's not ignore the role of myth-making in all this cultural exchange. The Greeks, for example, spun tales of the fierce, untamed Scythians, painting them as both noble savages and terrifying foes. These myths, while often exaggerated, served to both demonize and deify the Scythians, cementing their place in the cultural consciousness of the ancient world. It's a bit like how modern media perpetuates certain stereotypes, blending fact and fiction until they become inseparable. In the end, the Scythians were more than just traders or warriors. They were cultural chameleons, adapting and influencing, leaving a legacy that transcended their nomadic existence. They were the unsung maestros of a world orchestra, conducting a symphony of styles, tactics, and ideas that resonated across continents. Their story isn't just a chapter in the history of trade. It's a reminder of the power of cultural exchange, the impact of style, and the enduring legacy of those who dared to live on the edge of the known world. And as we prepare to dive deeper into their tale, keep in mind that the Scythians were not just participants in history. They were its architects, shaping the cultures that would follow in their wake. As the Scythians rode the waves of history, they became the poster children for how myths and reality can become as entangled as a horse's mane in a windstorm. Herodotus, the ancient Greek historian known for his flair for drama, had a field day with the Scythians. According to him, these nomads were the sort of people who would drink wine from their enemies' skulls. Because who needs a fancy chalice when you've got a perfectly good cranium lying around, right? But let's pump the brakes on that narrative for a moment and explore whether the Scythians were truly savages or just the victims of a historical smear campaign. The Scythians, with their penchant for dramatic flair, cultivated a reputation that was as sharp as their arrows. Herodotus wasn't just spinning tales out of thin air. He was tapping into a very real image that the Scythians themselves projected. They understood the power of intimidation, and let's face it, the whole Skull Cup thing was ancient shark marketing at its finest. But beyond the blood-curdling myths, there was a sophisticated society with structures that would surprise most of their contemporaries. Take their governance, for instance. Far from being a chaotic free-for-all, the Scythians had a form of democratic governance that would make even the Athenian assembly raise an eyebrow. They practiced a kind of tribal council system where decisions were made collectively by the leaders of various clans. Each clan, headed by a chief, had a voice in matters of war and peace, trade and diplomacy. It was like the ultimate ancient board meeting, complete with spirited debates, and one imagines the occasional dramatic exit. Given this structure, the Scythians were hardly the lawless hordes of legend. They had rules, laws, and customs that governed their society. When they weren't out riding like the wind or trading their gold for Greek olive oil, they were holding councils, discussing strategies, and making decisions that affected their entire community. It's a bit like imagining a biker gang with a penchant for parliamentary procedures. Now, let's talk horses. If there was one thing the Scythians could boast about without embellishment, it was their equestrian skills. These nomads were the original horse whisperers, their relationship with their mounts akin to that of modern pet owners with their pampered poodles. Horses weren't just transportation, they were integral to Scythian identity. This was a culture where a man was judged by the quality of his steed, and where horsemanship was as much a part of life as breathing. The Scythians developed innovative military strategies that turned their cavalry into the ancient equivalent of a special forces unit. Their tactics involved speed, agility, and the element of surprise. They were masters of the feigned retreat, a move that lured enemies into traps, only to turn the tables when least expected. It was the kind of strategy that would bring a tear to the eye of any modern military strategist. And speaking of numbers, the Scythian cavalry could mobilize thousands of horsemen at a moment's notice, making them a formidable force across the vast Eurasian steppe. But if horses were their strength, myths were their Achilles' heel. The Greeks, with their love for storytelling, cast the Scythians as both noble savages and barbaric warriors. This duality was both a blessing and a curse. On one hand, it kept potential invaders wary. On the other, it painted the Scythians in broad, often inaccurate strokes. It's a bit like being the subject of a viral meme. Once it's out there, it's tough to shake off. However, if we dig a little deeper, we find that the Scythians were more than just their reputation. They were skilled artisans, crafting gold jewelry so intricate it would make a Byzantine craftsman green with envy. Archaeological digs have uncovered treasures that reveal a society with a deep appreciation for art and beauty. These were no mere barbarians. They were connoisseurs of culture, with a taste for the finer things in life. So, what does this all mean for the myths that persist to this day? Well, myths often have a grain of truth, but they also serve a purpose beyond mere storytelling. In the case of the Scythians, their fearsome reputation was as much a tool of diplomacy as it was a byproduct of their lifestyle. They weren't just about living on the edge of civilization. They were defining it on their terms. As we venture further into their tale, let's remember that the Scythians were more than the sum of their myths. They were a society that thrived on mobility, adaptability, and a keen understanding of power dynamics. Through trade and warfare, they carved out a place for themselves in the annals of history, leaving behind a legacy that was both awe-inspiring and misunderstood. So, as the curtain rises on the next act of their story, keep in mind that the Scythians were not just actors in a historical drama. They were its directors, shaping the narrative with every hoofbeat and arrow shot. As the curtain rises on the final act of our Scythian tale, let's address the not-so-glamorous part of their history, the decline of their trade networks and eventual assimilation into larger empires. Yes, even these horse-riding, gold-trading nomads had to face the music, and it wasn't always a pleasant tune. The reasons for their waning influence read like a laundry list of historical woes. Climate change, political backstabbing, and a healthy dollop of bad luck. First, let's talk climate, because Mother Nature has a knack for throwing curveballs that can topple entire civilizations. Around the 4th century BCE, the Eurasian steppes faced climate shifts that were as welcome as a flat tire on a road trip. We're talking about colder temperatures and drier conditions, which turned their lush grazing lands into something resembling a dusty old carpet. For a society that lived and died by the hoof, this was the equivalent of a stock market crash. Less grass meant fewer horses, and fewer horses meant a weakened economy and military. But climate wasn't their only nemesis. Enter the geopolitical soap opera. As the Scythians were contending with nature's tantrums, the surrounding empires were busy playing a game of thrones that would have made even George R. Martin blush. The rise of the Macedonian Empire under Alexander the Great sent ripples, or more like tidal waves, through the region. Alexander, that ambitious Macedonian lad with a penchant for conquest, had his eyes set east, and the Scythians found themselves in the crosshairs of his expanding empire. The Scythians, who once swaggered through the steppes, now faced a dilemma: adapt, assimilate, or vanish like yesterday's news. Many chose assimilation, merging with the expanding territories of their more sedentary neighbors. This wasn't just a case of if you can't beat them, join them. It was survival. Over time, the Scythians faded into the background, becoming part of the cultural tapestry of empires like the Sarmatians and later the Goths. Their distinct culture, once as vibrant as their tattoos, slowly diluted into the broader Eurasian milieu. However, the Scythians didn't just disappear without a trace. Their legacy, like a hidden tattoo, remained etched in the economic and cultural systems of their successors. Their trade routes, those ancient highways of commerce, laid the groundwork for what would later become the Silk Road. Think of it as the original global trade network, connecting east and west long before the term globalization was coined. This was a supply chain that would eventually see everything from silk and spices to ideas and religions crisscrossing continents. And let's not overlook their impact on military tactics. The Scythians may have hung up their bows, but their strategies lived on. The hit-and-run tactics they perfected were adopted by successive cultures, influencing how wars were fought for centuries. It's a testament to their ingenuity that even the mighty Roman legions, with all their armor and discipline, took a page from the Scythian playbook when facing mounted adversaries. As we reflect on the Scythians, it's tempting to romanticize them as the rugged individualists of the ancient world. But their story is a reminder that even the most resilient societies can falter when faced with external pressures and internal fractures. Their decline highlights the fragility of civilizations when confronted with environmental changes and shifting power dynamics. Yet, their ability to adapt and influence future cultures underscores a different kind of legacy, one that's not just about survival, but about transformation. So, what can modern folks learn from these ancient nomads? Well, for one, the Scythians teach us the value of adaptability. In a world that's as unpredictable as ever, the ability to pivot, whether in trade, tactics, or technology, is invaluable. They also remind us that while might often makes right, it's the softer skills, like negotiation, cultural exchange, and strategic trade, that leave a lasting impact. In the end, the Scythians were more than their myths, more than their gold, and certainly more than their skull cups. They were a society that thrived on the margins, navigating the complexities of a world in flux with a blend of bravado and savvy. Their legacy isn't just a footnote in history books. It's a testament to the enduring power of cultural exchange and the indomitable spirit of those who dared to roam beyond the horizon. As the Scythians ride into the sunset of history, they leave behind a trail of hoofprints that still echo in the corridors of time, challenging us to rethink what it means to be truly connected in an ever-changing world. Roosters are the alarm clocks of ancient Rome, and today they're the first thing you hear. Good morning, citizen. It's the crack of dawn, and you're about to embark on a day that would make modern life look like a holiday. With the sun barely peeking over the horizon, you've got to roll out of bed, or rather, out of a rudimentary mattress stuffed with straw. Comfort, that's a myth for emperors and senators. Your first mission, breakfast. Now, before you get too excited, let's set expectations. Forget about eggs Benedict or avocado toast. The Roman morning meal is all about simplicity. Bread, perhaps dipped in wine if you're feeling fancy, or if last night's hangover needs taming. For the wealthier Romans, maybe some cheese or olives. But for the average Joe, or should I say, average Gaius, it's plain and practical. The Romans didn't believe in wasting time on breakfast. There's empire building to be done, with breakfast handled in about the time it takes to tie a toga. Assuming you've mastered that particular art form, you move on to hygiene. Here's where things get interesting. Personal cleanliness in ancient Rome is, let's say, a collective endeavor. You've got your trusty strigil, a curved metal tool that's basically a squeegee for skin, scraping off sweat and dirt. Forget soap, because that's not a thing yet. Instead, you're using olive oil to loosen up the grime before the real work begins. Once you've ungunked yourself, it's time to hit the baths. Public baths, or thermae, are the social media of Rome. It's where you catch up on gossip, network with patrons, and maybe even rub elbows with a senator. But hold on, stop right there. If you're picturing marble palaces with serene pools, slow down. Sure, some baths are grand, like Caracalla baths, sprawling over 27 acres with libraries and gardens. But not all are so luxurious. Many are cramped, noisy, and teeming with folks who might not share your dedication to the art of bathing. And then there's the hygiene. Oh, the irony. While you're there to get clean, the water is communal, and cleanliness standards are questionable. Romans, for all their architectural genius, haven't cracked the code on germ theory yet. So, you're sharing that tepid bathwater with who knows how many others. Plus, the plumbing systems, remarkable for their time, are still a breeding ground for bacteria. But hey, it's all part of the experience, right? The baths are more than just a place to scrub up. They're a hub of social activity. You might engage in a little light exercise in the paelstra, a sort of ancient gym, or play a game of ball. Don't overdo it, though. You're saving your energy for the real workday ahead. After the bath, you might indulge in a massage or anoint yourself with perfumed oils. Smelling nice is a status symbol, after all. As you leave the baths, perhaps you've overheard some juicy tidbits about the latest political scandal or a new law being debated in the Senate. Information is power, and in Rome, it's traded as freely as the coins in your purse. Speaking of which, it's time to head out and make your mark on this bustling city. You're cleanish, feddish, and ready to tackle whatever the day throws at you. Whether you're a merchant, a craftsman, or an aspiring politician, there's a world of opportunity waiting just beyond the bathhouse door. So there you have it. A Roman morning is less about leisure and more about efficiency. You've got an empire to sustain, and every moment counts. Grab your sandals, adjust your toga, and step into the chaotic beauty of Rome. The sun is rising, the Forum is calling, and this day is just getting started. So you've scrubbed off the grime, and now it's time to dive into the heart of Roman life, the marketplace. Picture it as the ancient world's version of Amazon, but with way more haggling and a whole lot less convenience. Forget the click of a button. Here, sharping's an athletic endeavor, complete with elbow jabs and strategic maneuvers. It's a contact sport where the stakes are high, and your bargaining skills can mean the difference between a decent meal and yet another round of the dreaded boiled cabbage. Welcome to the Forum Romanum, the bustling epicenter of trade, politics, and social drama. This isn't just a spot for picking up groceries. It's where the pulse of the city beats strongest. The Forum's a cacophony of noises. Vendors shouting, coins clinking, animals bleeding, all mixing into a symphony of commerce. Sounds idyllic, right? Well, not so fast. The place is as chaotic as a Black Friday sale, with just as many elbows. Your first stop, the fishmonger, where you'll encounter the infamous garum, a fermented fish sauce that's as essential to Roman cuisine as ketchup is to fries today. But hold your nose, because this stuff isn't winning any awards for fragrance. Made from fermented fish guts left to stew in the sun, it's the secret elixir that makes Roman food palatable, or so they say. And don't be fooled by its humble origins. This pungent potion can cost as much as 1,000 sesterces per amphora, depending on quality. That's like forking out a modern fortune for a small bottle of luxury balsamic vinegar. It's the caviar of condiments, but with an aroma that could clear a room. While you're contemplating whether to splurge on this liquid gold, let's talk cash. Roman coinage is a scandal all its own. The denarius, the silver standard, has been getting lighter and less pure, thanks to a little thing we call inflation. Imagine finding out your morning coffee costs twice as much because someone decided to mix in a little lead with the silver. That's the Roman economy for you, tricky and unpredictable. The emperor's been shaving off silver content like it's a bad habit, and you, dear citizen, are left to foot the bill. But let's not get bogged down in economic woes. Back to the hustle, where your next mission is grabbing some grains. Rome runs on bread, the ultimate staple, and the grain market is the beating heart of the city's food supply. The government knows this, which is why the Annona, a sort of ancient welfare program, ensures that grain is distributed to the populace. But don't think it's all sunshine and free loaves. The queues are long, tempers are short, and if someone cuts in line, you might find yourself in a verbal sparring match that puts modern internet trolls to shame. Now, let's address the myth of the Roman feast. It's easy to picture lavish banquets with endless courses, but for most Romans, a meal is far more modest. A bit of bread, some porridge, maybe a handful of olives if you're lucky. The rich might indulge in peacocks and dormice, but your average Gaius is more likely contemplating his daily bean stew. That said, the allure of the grand Roman feast is hard to resist, much like imagining every Frenchman with a baguette under his arm. As you navigate through the throng of shoppers, you'll notice the stalls are brimming with produce, lentils, chickpeas, and vegetables that would make any modern farmer's market look sparse. And then there's the meat section, not for the faint-hearted. Whole animals hang in various stages of disassembly, a sight that reminds you that refrigeration is still a couple of millennia away. It's a visceral reminder of where your food comes from, one that modern supermarkets have sanitized away. But the marketplace is more than just a place to stock your pantry. It's a social stage, a political arena, a breeding ground for rumor and intrigue. You might overhear a senator debating a new law, or catch a glimpse of a gladiator, the ancient equivalent of a celebrity sighting. Information flows like wine at a bacchanal, and if you're savvy, you'll pick up a tidbit or two that might just give you an edge in whatever scheme you're cooking up. At the heart of all this activity is the spirit of Rome itself, a city that thrives on the energy of its people, where every transaction is a negotiation and every interaction a potential story. The Forum is where you feel the city's heartbeat, chaotic yet mesmerizing, a place where the past, present, and future collide in a cacophony of life. And just like that, the marketplace becomes not just a place to buy and sell, but a microcosm of Roman society itself. Each coin exchanged, each haggled price reflects the broader economic currents, the political tides, and the social hierarchies that define the ancient world. You're not just shopping, you're participating in the grand tapestry of Roman life, with all its complexities and contradictions, as the sun climbs higher in the sky, casting its golden glow over the bustling forum. You realize that this day in the life of a Roman citizen is as much about survival as it is about endurance. It's a dance between tradition and innovation, between the romanticized legends of old and the gritty reality of daily life. In Rome, the marketplace is a theater where every citizen plays their part, each transaction a testament to the resilience and ingenuity that drives this ancient metropolis forward. So, as you weave your way through the throng, clutching your purchases and dodging the occasional runaway goat, take a moment to appreciate the chaos. It's not just life, it's Roman life, in all its messy, magnificent glory. And with the afternoon stretching ahead, who knows what other adventures await in this city that never truly sleeps. Dodging a runaway goat is just another day in the life of a Roman citizen. But as the sun hits its zenith, it's time to swap the clamor of the marketplace for the roar of the Colosseum. Ah, the Colosseum, Rome's answer to a blockbuster movie, complete with action, drama, and a splash of horror. Forget CGI. Here, the special effects are all too real. Welcome to the Flavian Amphitheater, a marvel of Roman engineering that seats up to 50,000 spectators. That's right, 50,000 people packed in like sardines, eager to watch the day's blood-soaked entertainment. Built in 80 AD under Emperor Vespasian and completed by his son Titus, this iconic structure is more than just a venue. It's a symbol of Rome's might and a testament to human fascination with spectacle. As you approach, the sheer scale of the Colosseum is breathtaking. Standing at nearly 160 feet tall with its intricate network of vaults and arches, it's a marvel of ancient construction techniques. But let's not get too misty-eyed. The reality is, this isn't just a place for games. It's a stage for political theater. Emperors use the games to curry favor with the masses, distracting them from the empire's less glamorous issues like poverty and war. Bread and circuses, baby. Bread and circuses. Inside, air is thick with anticipation. The crowd's buzz is punctuated by the distant clang of weapons as gladiators prepare for battle. You've heard the stories. A thumbs up for mercy, a thumbs down for death. But here's a twist. The whole thumbs thing, it's a bit of a myth. Ancient sources suggest the gesture was more complex, involving a closed fist with a thumb inside to spare a gladiator, or a thumb pointed sideways to condemn. But hey, why let facts get in the way of a good story? In between the gladiatorial contests, there's an intermission act that would make modern halftime shows blush. Wild animal hunts, or venations, are the order of the day, with exotic beasts pitted against each other or hapless humans. Lions, tigers, elephants, oh my. These creatures are shipped from the far reaches of the empire at a cost that would make even the most extravagant modern event planner balk. It's a display of Rome's reach and wealth, a reminder of the empire's power to command nature itself. But let's not sugarcoat it. For all its grandeur, the Colosseum is a brutal place. The sands are stained with the blood of thousands of men and beasts, a grim testament to the human appetite for violence. Yet there's an odd sense of community here, a shared experience that binds the crowd. In a city as vast and diverse as Rome, it's events like these that create a sense of identity. However macabre, not in the mood for gladiators. No problem. Rome's got options. Head over to the theater, where the entertainment is a tad more refined. The Theater of Pompey, with its elegant tiers and open-air setting, is a far cry from the barbarity of the Colosseum. Here, you can enjoy a comedy by Plautus or a tragedy by Seneca, delivered with all the pomp and circumstance of a modern Broadway show. Roman theater is no mere pastime. It's a mirror reflecting the complexities of Roman life. The plays often tackle themes of power, morality, and the human condition, offering a safe space to critique society under the guise of fiction. But don't be fooled into thinking this is some highbrow affair. Roman audiences are notoriously rowdy, quick to heckle a poor performance or shower the stage with applause for a hit. Think of it as Shakespeare in the park, but with toga-clad critics. The theater also serves a political purpose, subtly shaping public opinion and reinforcing societal norms. And while the actors might not enjoy the status of a modern-day celebrity, they wield influence in their own right. The playwrights, too, are acutely aware of the fine line they tread between art and treason. Crafting a satire too pointed could land you in hot water with the powers that be. It's an ancient form of journalism, with all the risks and rewards that come with speaking truth to power. As the afternoon sun begins to wane, you might wander towards the Circus Maximus, Rome's grand arena for chariot racing. Imagine NASCAR, but with wooden chariots, 4-horse teams, and a healthy disregard for safety regulations. This is where the real adrenaline junkies hang out, betting on their favorite factions: reds, whites, greens, and blues. The stakes are high, and the crashes spectacular. Single race can last for 7 laps, stretching over several miles, with fortunes won and lost in the blink of an eye. But the Circus Maximus is more than just a racetrack. It's a social hub, a place where the lines between classes blur as citizens of all stripes come together to cheer, jeer, and maybe even engage in a little political gossip. In Rome, where the personal is always political, even a day at the races can have implications far beyond the finish line. As the games wrap up and the crowds disperse, you're left with a sense of the city's dual nature. Rome is a place of contrasts, where the sublime and the savage coexist in a delicate dance. The entertainment, as diverse and dynamic as the city itself, serves not just to amuse, but to reflect and reinforce the values of a society at the height of its power. So, as you leave the arena, theater, or racetrack, you carry with you more than just memories of the day's events. You're part of the living tapestry of Rome, a citizen of an empire that, despite its flaws, continues to captivate the imagination. And as evening descends, bringing with it the promise of new adventures, you can't help but wonder what tomorrow might hold in this eternal city of contradictions. As the shadows lengthen and the hustle of the arena fades into the background, you find yourself drawn to the true pulsating heart of Roman life. The Forum. If you think of the Forum as just a place for political wheeling and dealing, well, you're in for a surprise. It's more like the Roman Times Square, but with togas and far fewer neon lights. The Forum Romanum isn't just a single spot. It's a sprawling testament to Rome's grandeur, a patchwork of temples, basilicas, and columns that whisper stories of ambition, betrayal, and power. Here, the scent of incense mingles with the less than glamorous aroma of everyday life. And the noise, it's the sound of history being made, or sometimes unmade. At first glance, it may seem chaotic. Senators in their pristine white togas huddle in heated debate, while orators stand on platforms, their voices booming over the clatter of sandals against stone. You might even catch a glimpse of Cicero himself, gesticulating wildly as he delivers a blistering attack on Catiline. Yes, the same Cicero who thought he could talk his way into, or out of, anything. This place is less about calm deliberation and more about theatrical flair, where rhetoric is an art form and words are weapons. Now, let's talk politics, Roman style. Forget the idea of a balanced government. This is a world of power plays and alliances that would make a modern political strategist weep with envy. The Roman Republic, in its twilight years, is a masterclass in the art of the political backstab. Senators vie for influence, not just with each other, but with the ever-watchful eyes of the people, the plebeians, standing by to cheer or jeer. Speaking of plebeians, they're not just passive spectators in this political theater. Oh no, they're the chorus, the echo chamber, the social media of ancient Rome. Their votes matter, especially in the assemblies, and they know it. They're courted by politicians with promises of grain doles and gladiatorial games, the ancient equivalent of campaign rallies and chicken dinners. Here's the catch. While the plebeians have a voice, it's the patricians holding the purse strings. Let's debunk a myth. The Senate isn't the be-all and end-all of Roman politics. Sure, it's prestigious, but real power often rests outside its marble halls. Enter the triumvirates, those informal alliances that shake the very foundations of power. Take Julius Caesar, Pompey, and Crassus, the three amigos of Roman politics. Their unholy alliance, formed in 60 BC, bypassed the Senate to divvy up the Roman world like a pie. But like any good soap opera, it ended in betrayal, with Caesar crossing the Rubicon and declaring Alia Iacta est, the die is cast. And what about the scandals? Oh, they're as juicy as they come. Take Clodius Pulcher, a nobleman caught sneaking into a sacred women-only festival dressed as a woman. His motive? To seduce Caesar's wife. The scandal rocked Rome, leading to the famous dictum, Caesar's wife must be above suspicion. Clodius was acquitted, proving once again that in Rome, charm and connections often trump justice. Meanwhile, economic strife simmers beneath the surface. The grain supply is a perennial issue, with shortages leading to riots and senators scrambling to placate the masses. Enter the grain dole, a lifeline for many, but a political tool for the savvy. Control the grain, control the populace. It's a simple formula that keeps the city's pulse steady, even as the empire teeters on the edge of chaos. As you wander through the forum, you can't help but notice the statues and monuments that crowd every corner, each one a testament to Rome's obsession with legacy. These aren't just stone figures, they're stories carved in marble. Take the column of Trajan, a towering spiral of reliefs depicting the emperor's victories in Dacia. It's a 100-foot-tall comic strip celebrating imperial might. But let's not forget the reality. These victories came at the cost of countless lives and a treasury stretched thin. But not all is grandiose. The forum is also where justice, or something resembling it, is dispensed. The praetors, Rome's judicial officials, hold court here. Imagine Judge Judy, but with a laurel wreath and a lot more authority. Legal disputes range from land ownership to matters of honor, and they're settled with a mix of law, tradition, and sometimes a hefty dose of bribery. And then there's the Vestal Virgins, the priestesses charged with maintaining the sacred fire of Vesta. A select group of women who wield a surprising amount of influence in a male-dominated society. Their purity is supposed to ensure Rome's safety, a convenient excuse for any misfortune that befalls the city. Blame it on the Vestals if the Tiber floods or the crops fail. But cross them, and you risk divine wrath, or worse, social disgrace. As the afternoon sun dips lower, casting long shadows over the ancient stones, the forum remains a hive of activity. Deals are struck, alliances forged, and reputations made or shattered with a single speech. It's a world of contrasts where the ideals of democracy clash with the realities of power. You leave the forum with more than just a sense of history. You've glimpsed the inner workings of an empire. It's messy, it's complex, and it's utterly fascinating. And as the day winds down, you realize that in Rome, the past is never just the past. It's a living, breathing part of the present. The stories you've heard, the sights you've seen, they're all threads in the tapestry of a city that continues to captivate the imagination, even as it stands on the brink of monumental change. But don't pack your bags just yet. Tomorrow promises more intrigue, more drama, and perhaps a few surprises in this city that never truly sleeps. You've scratched the surface, but there's a whole world left to explore. And who knows? The next twist in Rome's storied saga might just be around the corner. But don't pack your bags just yet. Tomorrow promises more intrigue, more drama, and perhaps a few surprises in this city that never truly sleeps. You've scratched the surface, but there's a whole world left to explore. And who knows? The next twist in Rome's storied saga might just be around the corner. As the sun begins to set, painting the sky with hues of orange and pink, it's time to trade the chaos of the forum for the refined indulgence of a Roman cena or dinner party. Forget your modern notion of dinner as a quick affair. In ancient Rome, cena is the main event. It's where food, politics, and social hierarchies collide in a heady mix that makes even the most extravagant modern parties look like a child's tea party. First, let's set the scene. You're not just strolling into a dining room, you're entering a social battleground. The dining room, or triclinium, is dominated by a U-shaped arrangement of couches, 3 to be exact. Because why sit when you can lounge? Reclining while eating isn't just about comfort. It's a statement of status. If you're flat on your back, you're doing it right. If you're sitting upright, well, better luck next time in the social ladder climb. Now about the guest list. Roman dinner parties are a who's who of society, where your place at the table, or rather on the couch, speaks volumes about your social standing. The host, or dominus, plays the role of social architect, carefully arranging the seating to reflect the pecking order. Top spots go to the most esteemed guests. Think senators, wealthy merchants, or perhaps the odd visiting dignitary. The less fortunate are relegated to the ends, far from the host's ear and influence. It's a little like being seated at the kids' table during a family Thanksgiving, but with more political implications. And what's on the menu? Let's tackle the myth first. Picture those lavish Roman feasts with stuffed peacocks and flamingo tongues. Sure, they happened, but only for the ultra-wealthy. For most, the cena is more about hearty stews and simple grains. Bread is a staple, often accompanied by olives, cheese, and whatever seasonal vegetables are on hand. Meat is a luxury, and if it's on the table, You can bet it's been stretched with every trick in the Roman cookbook. But let's not forget the piece de resistance, the garum. Ah, garum, the fermented fish sauce that's the ancient equivalent of putting ketchup on everything. It's a love-it-or-hate-it condiment that's as divisive as pineapple on pizza. For those who can afford it, a splash of high-quality garum can elevate a dish from drab to fab, or at least mask the taste of less-than-fresh ingredients. As the evening progresses, the wine flows freely. And when we say freely, we mean it. Romans believed in diluting their wine with water. A ratio of 3 parts water to 1 part wine was typical, because getting completely sloshed was frowned upon, at least until the second or third course. The idea is to enjoy a pleasant buzz, not a full-blown bacchanal. Think of it as the difference between sipping a fine Bordeaux and downing shots of tequila. But the cena is more than just a meal. It's an opportunity to showcase one's wit and wisdom. After all, this is a society that values rhetoric and eloquence. Discussions range from politics to philosophy, and if you're particularly lucky, you might hear a recitation of poetry or a dramatic reading. It's a chance to impress, to network, and if you play your cards right, to curry favor with your betters. As you recline, glass in hand, you can't help but reflect on the myths of Roman opulence. Yes, there's grandeur here, but it's often more about appearances than reality. The gilded cups may shine, but they're filled with diluted wine. The guests may appear to be the cream of society, but beneath the veneer lies a web of alliances and rivalries, as complex as the empire itself. So, what's the takeaway from this day in the life of a Roman citizen? For starters, the Romans were masters of the balancing act. They built an empire of contradictions, where grandeur met grit, and public spectacle masked private struggles. They understood that power was as much about perception as it was about reality. It's a reminder that no matter how distant or different a culture may seem, human nature remains remarkably consistent. In the end, Rome's legacy is not just in its monuments or its military conquests, but in its ability to captivate and endure. The myths, the realities, the stories, they all intertwine to form a tapestry that continues to intrigue and inspire. As you finish your cena, sipping the last of your watered-down wine, you realize that you've been part of a living history, a narrative that's as much about the present as it is about the past. And so, dear Roman citizen, as you unrecline from your couch and make your way home under the moonlit skies of the eternal city, you carry with you the essence of Rome itself, a place that is, and always will be, a testament to the complexities and contradictions of human ambition. Here's to the stories yet to be told, and the histories yet to be made in this magnificent tapestry we call Rome.